So my name is Elsa de Vienne, and I gave a paper yesterday. So I'm not going to introduce myself, but I'm pleased to be chairing this panel entitled "Whose Streets?" So I'll introduce the first speaker, Mariam Draher. Oh la la, it was much better the first time I said it. Mariam is the CEO of Joy Riders. She moved to London in 2008 from the Netherlands and was surprised that people didn't cycle, especially not as a form of transport. She got involved with Joy Riders a few years later and now works with women and their families across the capital to encourage behavior change amongst the communities that are the least likely to take up cycling. So Mariam, you have, I think, just we've discussed 20 minutes, right? And then we'll take the questions probably at the end, but if there's a question that absolutely must be asked right after Mariam's talk, we'll have it then. Thank you, Mariam.
Okay, so yeah, I'm starting with a little film, something which is also on our website, which we use to advertise Joy Riders a bit, and I think it shows quite the
Yeah, obviously.
Okay.
That's an incredible view.
So how we started. So Joy Riders started in the London Borough of Waltham Forest, and I don't think that it's a coincidence because it started in 2016, 2 years after Mini Holland kind of started being built. That was certainly one of the catalysts we had, having had, you know, the first safe cycle routes. We also started out from a location which has direct access to green spaces, which I think was very important for us from the time. And we had support from the council very early on, at the time, not in a financial way, but they provided us with a stock of bikes, because a lot of women who came on our bike rides, they didn't own their own bikes. And so we were able to provide them with bikes and they could come along on the ride. Some women also trained as ride leaders and soon after as cycle instructors, because we also had a lot of women coming to us who didn't even know how to ride a bike in the first place. One thing also that came clear very early on was we had to break down barriers. There were women who really happily came straight away. Yeah, I want to cycle, but then there were others who needed a bit more convincing. And these are the issues we quite commonly face. So there's social and physical safety concerns. Physical is obviously worried about, you know, cycling on the road and stuff. And social, that really goes back more to, you know, is the space safe when I cycle? Are there any people who might harm me? Do people abuse me on the streets while I'm cycling on the roads? Which are all valid concerns, and it all happens, especially in London. Bike muggings are actually quite prevalent, and there are spaces also where I live, where I don't cycle on my own, because it's very well known that people get pushed off their bike and the bikes get taken off them. So it's somewhere where we go as a group, but not necessarily alone. But we make people aware of it, and we say, look, here it's safe to cycle. This space isn't that safe, and stay away from it. And so over time, there's much more knowledge amongst the communities about the safe cycling routes. Again, that feeds into the next point. So lack of knowledge of cycle routes is often a problem. People know how to drive from A to B and how to get there on the bus or public transport, but they wouldn't necessarily know which routes do we cycle on, which can be very different than the main roads. Although now, especially in Waltham Forest, we have great cycle lanes across most of the main roads, and they are definitely getting better across London. There are cultural barriers, although I would say over the last few years, they have been less prevalent. I think people got more used to see women cycling from different communities. So there is a kind of a role model effect now happening, although they're still relevant. And we actually had women who we once had a woman who called her husband after she heard about us and was like, I want to take part. And her husband was like, no, that's not appropriate for you. And she didn't come. So those things happen, unfortunately, but it definitely is much less than it used to be. I think one important part is empowerment and encouragement. We use the women who are already with us to empower and encourage other women, their friends, colleagues, whatever, family members. There's, again, it feeds on in the next bit, a lack of role models, which is, again, getting much better. So having role models is really important. If you see women you can identify with cycling, it is much easier to take the first step. Something which stops a lot of women across all communities really is having negative experiences in the past. They might fell off their bike when they were riding as a child and then never got back on. And their first time back on a bike is really something they dread. But once they're back on, they're all into it. Also, sometimes it's more recent experiences, accidents, or a fall in adulthood, which I often feel for those women, it's much harder to get back on. But most eventually get there. And never learn to ride a bike, which is definitely one of the biggest barriers, I would say, again. And it's quite surprising how many women never learn to ride a bike. And I'm not talking about ethnic minority women, but women across the whole community we have in London. So that led to us doing learn to ride sessions, because obviously you can't ride a bike, you need to learn it. So again, it came through a lot of women who came to us and they really wanted to learn to ride. All our women's only sessions are run by female instructors. That's really important, because some women wouldn't feel comfortable with male instructors. Attendance is never limited. They can come as often as they want. Some women, they learn in the first session, and that's great, but others need 10 sessions to learn how to ride, and that's also fine, especially as we get older. We have more health conditions. Arthritis is, for example, a really common one, which a lot of women, especially when they come to their 50s, 60s, deal with, and we have women in that age group quite a lot. So it just takes a bit longer. We also, again, we provide bikes and helmets for all our sessions, and what is really something that works really well is WhatsApp groups. We put all the women in a WhatsApp group. They're very localized. So the sessions we run in Summerstan, for example, where this photo was taken, they're only women from those sessions. And we post pictures there of their progress, because they don't often like their pictures to be used on social media, but they're fine in the WhatsApp group. And that in turn, again, encourages other women to, give it a try. Often women are in the WhatsApp group before they come, and they take a few weeks actually to build up that courage to come and finally see how it works. So
sorry to interrupt. I just realised I haven't turned the camera on.
Oh.
So people can't see you.
No worries.
We can hear you, which is
Okay, that's the main thing. Thank you.
No.
And once they learn to ride, we take them on bike rides, or if they already can ride, they can come straight on the bike rides. We have 10 groups across London. They are mostly volunteer-led. We have a mix of routes. So there are one is kind of commuter routes, where we like to show them how you can get across the city to spaces that matter for you, be it the workplace, shopping centers, supermarkets, schools. The other one is green spaces. Because one thing we experience is that a lot of women actually don't know their local green spaces, because it's very hard to get to often on public transport. So with cycling, we introduce them to green spaces. And then we also have different lengths of rides. Our beginners rides are about 5 miles. It's not very long, but they take us the same time as an intermediate ride of 12 miles, because women on a beginner's ride are just much slower. There's a lot more stop and starting. We are explaining how to cycle safely on the roads, what positions to be in, how to behave at junctions, and all those things. So it takes a lot longer. We're also talking a lot about gears, even though they learn that in the Learn to Ride sessions. It's something which takes a while to, to get into them. And obviously gears make life so much easier. So it's a mix of different routes, and there's something for everyone. Also, the very early routes, the beginners routes are really designed in a way that they're very safe. So low traffic neighborhood, cycle lanes, green spaces is the preferred way. Although we have inner London groups like in Westminster or in Camden who don't have that luxury, and they work around that one and they manage just as well. And I think it's important that women really learn to ride where they live so they can then cope with whatever's going on in the neighborhood. All rides have a coffee stop, which creates space to talk, space to connect. We have women from all communities coming, so we're not focused on specific communities. We take women from across all. Whoever wants to come can come. So it's bridging barriers between communities as well. And I think that's the other point of Joyriders, besides the cycling, bringing communities together. We also have volunteer opportunities. So women who are more confident, they can volunteer with us as ride leaders and they get trained up by us. And again, they have WhatsApp groups, which is just fantastic to connect. And we have a lot of women who are in all our WhatsApp groups across London and travel quite a long distance to take part in the different rides we do. And yeah, some come on almost every ride. So they spend their life cycling with us. What we experienced from that, so at first, when we started out, the first few years, we were really quite stuck in that belief that women need their own space and that they just want to have women's only spaces. And that is true to some extent. It's definitely really important. So I'm not saying it is, but women came to us and say, we want to ride with our families. So we did family rides. We're still doing them. Quite important to many of the women, very inclusive. So you can see we have the taxi bike there with 2 boys who can't cycle by themselves because of their disabilities. The boy in front, in the yellow, he is autistic, so he needs some adjustments. And somewhere in between, there's also someone, a teenager on a trike. You can't see him, but he's there somewhere. So being really inclusive, making adaptations so that children with special needs can attend, and sometimes adults with special needs. So people really like to bring you know, their older children or their family members with special needs along as well, because it is a inclusive space. And yeah, they've been, as you can see, very, very popular, and we always have large groups. We always make sure that they are, again, similar to our beginners' rides on quiet roads, low traffic neighborhoods. They go to a location which is very child friendly with a playground or something, and a cafe nearby for the adults. Rather shorter, between 5 and 7 miles. We worked out that's a good distance for the younger children to ride. The youngest one we ever had independent riding was just 3 years old, and he made it all the way. So it's really great to see. And again, it's a mix of communities coming together, which is really nice. A few years ago, in 2022, we came up with bikeability for families. I was working as a cycle instructor in schools up until COVID. And one thing I noticed was that children who take part in bikeability, they already have to know how to ride a bike and have to know quite well how to ride a bike. And they, in many instances, not always have to own a bike, which obviously is for many children not the case. So bikeability is actually quite exclusive. It is not inclusive. There are a few improvements, but not many. Most schools are not willing to do learn to ride sessions, and equally secondary schools almost never do anything for older children to catch up. So most children who take part in bikeability, they have a fun week of riding and having less time at school, and it's definitely beneficial for them. But they hardly ever get to ride afterwards, unless they come from a cycling family already, where the parents already cycle. So we had funding to take bikeability to families. So we took the whole family. We had bikes of different sizes for everyone. And it was from learn to ride up until level 2, level 3 as well, depending on age of the children, because obviously you don't want to take, so does everyone know what level 1, 2, 3 is? Yeah, so kind of level 1 is the learn to ride stuff and kind of basic skills, and Level 2 is riding on quiet roads, and level 3 is then the really busy roads. So there are age, level 1 is not age restricted, but level 2 and level 3, you have to have a minimum age to kind of understand what you're actually being taught. So we did level 2, level 3, often it was the moms and the children who came to level 1 sessions, to the learn to write sessions, and the dads would join in at level 2 and at level 3 where we did. So that was quite interesting. The family you see there in the picture, they actually sold their car afterwards and are now a full-time cycling family. We're still in touch with them, which is really nice to see. That was in 2022 in Waltham Forest, and Southwark Council picked it up in 2023, where we are still running, and they're just trying to find us a second site, actually. It was voted in by residents to be one of the cycle projects they have to be continued, which was really a nice moment for us. Again, unlimited attendance, provision of bikes and helmets, encouraging people through conversations to try out different types of journeys and to try and the journeys on bikes. And very important, also a pathway to bike ownership, where we teamed up with Pedal My Wheels, which is a London-based organization, which is supported by a lot of London boroughs. They get up to 3 to 6 months of a bike for free. So it's a subscription model. You pay for 24 months and you pay it in installments. It's interest-free though, and they don't do credit checks either. So you know, even people with a dodgy credit history can get a bike through them, and the councils pay for the first 3 to 6 months. So you get quite a chunk of the price taken off. At that time, people can use, you know, they get used to cycling, they get used to having a bike. They see that it's actually, you know, better than public transport or the car. It's faster. They get a lock and helmet provided with it as well. So it's kind of the whole package. And yeah, we are actively working with Pedal My Wheels together to get people into bike ownerships. We did some, we collected some data. So this is the ethnicities we had in the Waltham Forest project, which is really good. It very much reflects the ethnicities we have in the borough over a whole. So it's which you often don't have when you do projects. You get a certain demographic, but not all. We managed to get really across all demographics. So this is obviously the improvements people felt, like improved physical health, improved mental health, more confident in other parts of life as well, because, you know, if you cycle on the road, you suddenly feel this great confidence boost. They enjoyed new experiences, they discovered new places and met different people from different communities. And here, this is the type of journeys. It's not very great, this graph, because it's obviously not quite true. But people could click multiple choice. It was a multiple choice one. So a lot of people cycle more for fun and leisure, but also a huge chunk to visit family and friends, to do their shopping, to work, to school and college. So there's definitely a modal shift going on. One thing we took also on, so after we've done all this with women and families, we thought there need to be some men as well who maybe need a bit support. So we found this bunch. It's called the Wild Bunch. And it's actually a cardiac rehab group who was funded by, started by Brian Coleman, who is the head of cardiac rehab at Barts Hospital Trust. They started out at very beginners level, so they all had cardiac events, heart attacks, they have pacemakers, they have stents, really severe. Some of them, they really struggled in the first sessions to walk from the car park to the bike container, which is like a 1 minute walk. They found that hard. The first rides we did with them was about 5 miles, which is really hard for them. All those guys in the pictures you see there, they can do now 15 to 20 miles rides. So it's really built up. There are actually 2 groups. So one is for the beginners who can't do very much. And then this is the group for the, you know, the people who are longer part and who can cycle for longer. It's also really encouraging older people to take up cycling. So they are, the youngest person in this group is, apart from the ladies, The youngest guy is around 45 and the oldest they're in their mid-70s. So it's really nice to do something for them as well. And it's more cycling like we do for joyriders, with quite similar, but how we do it for the women, you know, relaxed, different levels, going into green spaces, but also commuter routes. And it's just a leisurely, relaxed ride with a coffee stop as well. Quite a similar.
Maya, we're heading towards your 20 minutes, so you have like 2, 3,
Okay,
4
so
minutes.
this is just a ride we did to Southend-on-Sea. I think I just put this photo because it shows the communities we reach all coming together. That was really nice. We do also sessions at young people's mental health inpatients unit with the NHS. Bike maintenance courses, really, really important. Yeah, and that's just some events we did and with whom we collaborate, to different organizations we work with. That photo was from the Women's Freedom Ride in London this year, which I was leading together with the London Cycling Campaign. We had 800 to 1,000 women, I think there roughly, not just women, women and allies. And I just want to quickly, this one case study, Takia. Takia is a fantastic woman. She came to us 2 years ago. She lied to us. She couldn't ride a bike, but she said she could. But she managed it through her first ride, and she learned to ride on that ride. She bought her own bike after 3 months. She trained this ride lead after 6. And this year she did ride London 100 by mistake. She was meant to do the 60, but she missed it. And that's the 100. Then she cycled London to Brighton. And she ran the London Marathon as well out of this. That's something she took up out of joyriders, and that's the end. So
Wow.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Maya. But I mean, joyriders is called joyriders for a reason. I think your presentation has brought us all so much joy, you know, like seeing all these smiles and smiling faces. Now we're moving on to Zoe's paper. So Zoe Banks Gross has over, I hope I'm not mispronouncing this. Gross, okay. Has over 20 years of professional experience, the bulk of which was in environmental management and community management. Her experience in community management includes being a director of a community energy group, a non-executive director of Playing Out, which we've already heard about yesterday with Allison, and founding a critical mass family cycling group. I've done several of those myself. It's always wonderful. She's interested in the intersections between public health, social justice, and sustainability. Zoe, we're very, very happy to have you here today. Please.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm going to talk about streets for everyone. I loved the Joyriders presentation, and it's just so exciting to see, I guess, a street full of women on cycles, which again, two groups of people who are traditionally marginalized, just taking up that space. So yeah, maybe I should use it.
If you click and then I'll do that. That might. There you go, Siobhan.
Yeah.
Okay.
So whose streets? The problem is that streets are currently not for everyone. At Sustrans, we talk about livable cities and towns for everyone and paths for everyone, and we're talking about really inclusive spaces when we say for everyone. And the impact of that, it means that, again, people from often underserved backgrounds are disproportionately impacted. And that means, you know, you've got less space, but also you're going to be experiencing more air pollution, more noise pollution. You're going to be more likely to get run over by a car, all sorts of things coming from these backgrounds who haven't been designing these spaces. So the solutions, I think it is really important to think about, you know, what can we do? What should we do? How can we change this? Really involving local people and communities in co-designing the streets, the spaces. How can we retrofit places or design new places for people to make them easy to walk, wheel, and cycle? We also need to think about how can we actually change the face of the people who are responsible for engineering and designing and planning our cities and towns and rural areas as well. So these are the changes that we would like to see at Sustrans. So yeah, reducing the traffic speed and volume, making sure that there are sociable spaces where people can dwell, stop, hang out, and connecting people to green space and public space, really putting people first at transport and planning policy instead of cars, for example. They're valuing the heritage of places and making our cities and towns more inclusive for everyone. So I'm going to look at my phone because I've got some stats here. 80% of the public realm in our cities and towns is the road network. So if you think about the space that we have for people and what it's been actually given over to, it's cars. And we can also see that cars are getting bigger every year. You know, we've got these humongous sort of Range Rovers that are designed not for cities, but they're just taking up space. This is Winchester, actually. And yeah, you can see that that street was not designed really for cars in the first place, much less really large ones. Maybe some of you are familiar with a paper that came out called Car Harm earlier this year from Minor. Maybe it's been spoken about.
The author was here yesterday.
Pardon?
The author was here
Oh,
yesterday.
excellent, yeah. I mean, I think it's really important just to think about how much actually our streets are actually causing us harm. And Ian Walker also wrote a paper, came out last year, motor normativity. It's just become totally normal to jeopardize people's public health, really, and safety in the name of vehicles, which is really a pity. So at Sustrans, we've been carrying out research since 2015. We've had backlash studies, which have now been, they're walking and cycling indices. But we've extrapolated the 23 that we've got to look at what that means for the country, as sort of an aggregate report. And one of the questions that we ask in this is, you know, what percentage of people, what would you like to be using for a form of transport, less or more? And we can actually see that a lot of people would like to be driving less. So that was one of the new questions this year. I'm going to talk a bit more about the walking and cycling index data later on. But I think that's one of the things that we've seen a lot of people, you know, create this culture war discourse around, like, is it cars or is it not, you know? And actually we can see a lot of people don't want to be in their cars. They do want to use public transport more, they want to cycle more, and they want to be able to walk more as well. Thinking about this transition that we are in, we need to be thinking about how it works for everyone again, and especially gender comes up. But I think earlier thinking about skateboarding, also thinking about if you've got to use an Uber or, you know, vehicles, the space that we have available to us is actually not a space that people feel necessarily safe in. And women are much more likely to be doing different types of trips than men as well. Historically, our transport system has been designed for men, whether it was the rail network, the car network, otherwise, and even thinking about getting around a city to do these multimodal chaining trips of like, oh, I've got to get to the shops, I've got to pick up the kids from the school, but do all these type of things that men are less likely to do, but the network hasn't really been designed for that. So this is just a picture from Tim Gill's Urban Playground book, and I think it's a good representation of like the type of trip chaining that you've got to do if you've got young children. And I think it's, again, something that's not really considered in the way that we're planning our cities. So we need to be thinking about, are we making our cities actually accessible for everyone? And that's gender, but also thinking about social justice overall, health, and the climate emergency. If we have a really good network of public transport, sustainable transport, active travel, people will want to choose that, and they won't be feeling like they need to choose getting into a private car. We also need to ensure that people are involved in the process, that we're not doing things to people, but we're doing them with them. We're asking them what they want, what they need, and having an iterative process. So we use co-design at Sustrans, and prior to working for Sustrans as well, I'm also just a big believer in co-designing spaces, because I think it's really important actually to get some of those solutions from people experiencing problems in the first place, and continuing the process iteratively. So going back and not just saying, okay, we've got the solution, that's it, see you later. And yeah, so really working with people and going back, this is just another graphic of the double diamond approach, and this one's from the Design Council, really that sort of discovering the problems, defining the solutions, developing them and delivering them. And yeah, that it is just really iterative. You keep going back. Southtrans worked with the Association for Collaborative Design, and this is the REBA engagement overlay. And again, this is looking at how you build in engaging with people throughout the process. So REBA is often used in building construction, and I think it's actually really useful to drive that home. We may be seeing a housing boom, who knows? But you know, we're building housing. Let's ask people what they need, but also consider, you know, yeah, you can maybe put some EV charging points in, but actually, are kids going to be able to play in those areas? Are elderly people going to be able to visit family? Is it an area that's actually accessible via public transport, or have you created a neighborhood that's completely an isolated island, disconnected from everything? But yeah, connecting with people and connecting people with the process of what's happening is really important to make these changes. In 2023, we published our Disabled Citizens Inquiry, which Southtrans did with Transport for All. Often when I've spoken about active travel, one of the things people come back with, like, oh, disabled people, what about disabled people? You know, they need their cars. But actually, we asked disabled people, what do you need? And actually, cars was not the thing that most disabled people said. They wanted to be able to access public transport. They wanted to be able to access pavements. And again, making sure that there's services provided within walking distance of where they live. These things are actually really important, and not just having relentless car space. So the Walking and Cycling Index, so every 2 years, we've got 23 urban areas across the UK and Ireland. Each of them has over 1,100 people that are independently surveyed. Yeah, funding comes from local authorities as well as the Freshfield Foundation, Transport Scotland, and the National Transport Authority of Ireland. So it's really useful. I'm sure you all love data as well, but
Yeah.
it is really useful to be able to actually understand what's happening in those areas and giving people a voice, you know, what is their experience? And it does help our local authority partners actually secure investment and deliver some of those changes that they want to make. And you can actually use it really well for monitoring and measuring progress. So we've got city data, behavior data, benefits data, and lots of infographics. All of this is available online. We've also got an aggregate report, but it breaks everything down. You've also got some climate data, air quality data in there as well. We've got case studies, Andre and Emma, lovely Whole Foods shop owners in Southampton. They actually took on the lease of the shop when they knew that the area was going to be pedestrianized. So, you know, some people are like, oh no, you're going to lose business, it's going to be terrible. But actually they were like, no, this is a great opportunity. And they have seen it as a really good opportunity. And it's just, you know, again, so important to actually talk to people and not just assume that, oh, it's going to be bad for business. But yeah, so this is when we're doing the index, we are going out and speaking to people about their experiences and yeah, getting that, I guess, personal viewpoint as well. So we've just launched a data tool. So we've got 5 dashboards, what people think, what people do, city data, trips data, and benefits data. This is a screenshot of a query I did on the what people think data tool. You can actually look at a single location or across all cities, or you can look at just England or Scotland or Wales or England and Wales. It is really, I guess, if you like to play around with the dashboard, worth looking at, and just looking at, you know, what is it people say that would help them, for example, to walk or wheel more. And here you can see that more parks or green spaces close to home would have been very useful, or more places to stop and rest. Again, like benches come up quite a lot talking to people. This is what people do, and this one I looked at where residents most frequently use and how they travel to places, and then I did a comparison on ethnicity. So you can see it's just some differences in white people versus people from minority ethnic groups, and looking at parks and green spaces, for example. So you can see that people from minority ethnic groups are either not using these services, so parks and green spaces, and or not using active travel to get to them as much as white people. So again, it's really thinking about who are cities designed for, who's using those spaces right now, what are the type of things that we might look at changing to make things more equitable. This is the city data tool, and this I queried households within 800 meters. Again, this was across all of the index cities, but just, you know, really interesting to see what is available. Is that 800 meter actual metric necessarily good for everyone? Some people argue it should be 400 meters, but again, thinking about our cities and how they're functioning or not. It's another measure. This is the trips data, so you can look at walking, cycling, and destinations as well. Again, it's, if you think about all of the trips made, these are just for the index cities. Again, you look at them in miles or kilometers. This is the benefits data. This can be quite useful if you're trying to make an argument, for example, to a local authority or other people about the benefits, because money often does actually hit the message home, I guess, that people actually, it's saving the NHS money, it's, yeah, doing loads for the economy, actually, if people can walk and cycle more. I looked at this at the Bristol level as well, which again, this is just to demonstrate you can look at this at a single location and how much is generated from walking and cycling journeys. And this is looking at cities across England and Wales. So you can see Cambridge, where people do a lot of cycling. This has really high economic benefits. Bristol also has pretty high levels of cycling, and I'm not sure if Birmingham. Yeah, but you know, if you put some money into infrastructure and it's also normalized, I think more people will do it. This is an example of community engagement. So this is Bristol, the Bristol and Bath Railway Path, which is the first sort of Sustrans route. The last mile and a half has been really, I guess, a congested area because it's quite narrow. And just before the pandemic, Sustrans got some funding. This actually started before I started working for Sustrans, but I live in the neighborhood, so I was involved in some of the engagement. But they did actually ask a lot of people, what do you want? What would you like it to be like? What would make it better to use? There's schools along it. Loads of people use it for commuting. There's some, you know, mammals who like to go really fast on it as well. How can we make this work a bit better? So yeah, lots of ideas from lots of people. And this is one of the areas that was a real pressure point. So it was a turn of sort of blind corner, and they've now widened it substantially, made sort of a clear cycling two-way bit, and then a bit for pedestrians, which again, it's just so much use, and it looks nice as well. There's a mural alongside there, which was co-designed with local school children as well. So they have a bit of that ownership too, which again, I think helps avoid getting lots of vandalism across it too. But yeah, here we are. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Zoe. You were also very succinct and brief, so appreciate that as a payout for. Fantastic. Any immediate question, or should we move on to Ed's presentation?
Yeah.
Well, I think all the presentations so far really work really well together, so I'm sure we can have a lively conversation at the end. So Ed then is a 42-year-old father, designer, local councillor, and campaigner from rural Merseyside. He was just your run-of-the-mill suburbanite that liked to drive everywhere until he started riding to school with his children. Turning point moment in his life. His roles with Rural Council and Low Traffic Future see him mesh the complex worlds of campaigning whilst also delivering on the needs of the local residents that he represents. Ed, we are listening to you now. Thank you.
Hey, we start. So we have been having a break in between the second and third papers, but maybe we let Ed have his time and then we'll have a short break afterwards and then just people gather their thoughts. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you for the introduction and the time to talk. Really enjoyed it. I've been kind of tweaking this in the last 24 hours and even this morning as I've heard so much cool stuff. I've just tried to address bits in this presentation. I got that line emphasis added from a talk yesterday. Is that an academic thing, a phrase? Because I saw it and I thought that sounded cool.
What phrase?
Emphasis added. It seemed to be like,
Yes, we do.
Oh,
like,
right, yeah.
we do like to add emphasis.
I guess I was thinking because I try and add emphasis to the stories that I tell on Twitter or, to residents as a local councillor and through my work. I've got a background in graphic design and storytelling through visual digital marketing. So yeah, I'll try and explain what's going on here. So yeah, a little quick bit about me. If this works, there we go. That's the money shot of me and my two boys. Just your regular Volvo driving suburbanite dad. I'm a suburbanite and proud to be called a suburbanite. But something happened to me, 6-7 years ago when I started taking my kids to school by bicycle. It actually started a little bit before that because I'd been riding to work for a while and tried to start to figure out why no one else was riding with me. And why I hadn't ridden a bike for 10 or 15 years, this gap after I got my driver's license, because being a suburbanite, I was desperate at the age of 16 and 17 to learn to drive and, borrow my mum's Fiesta and do handbrake turns in car parks and all that kind of stuff that we do. But yeah, things changed for me when I started taking my two boys to school. A little bit about the culture that has shaped me. I'll probably regret talking about this. One of my favorite films is The Burbs, Tom Hanks's finest movie. So it's kind of about suburban living, that kind of hysteria that can sometimes crop up in suburbia. Amazing film, absolutely recommend that. I'm a massive Radiohead fan, as I said to you fan last night, and that album OK Computer has really shaped me. I was listening to it again on the train on the way down, and it's released in '97 at a similar time for me when I was 16. It's all about kind of the impending doom of technology and where it was going to take us. And there's a lot actually in there about automobility. The first track, Airbag, is about surviving the euphoria you feel when you survive a car crash. There's a lot of automobility through there within the videos and then songs, really, and a kind of the kind of suburban dream as well. The kind of alienation that it can create, the kind of absurdism of it sometimes. And how we kind of long for a kind of return to nature. So yeah, and also a little mention to June, which I'm a bit obsessed with at the moment. It's a weird sci-fi story, but it's actually a really interesting political story. It's kind of elements of imperialism there. Oil as a weapon, you said, John, in this spice is the weapon, is oil and how it's used. There's undertones of racism in there as well. Really fascinating story that I'm a bit obsessed with at the moment.
Did you say Dune, the film?
Yeah. Well worth investigating and reading. So this is a still from a video I made, which I can share later on. I was watching a lot of cycling videos, cycle guys and those kind of folks that ride to work with a camera, showing all the horrors and all the scary moments. And I was starting to do that myself. And I thought, I should strap one to a camera to my 6-year-old boy on his ride to school and see how it looks. And I ended up doing it for about 6 months, riding on the road with him on this tight little suburban street, just to kind of highlight the horror of it all. And it was quite a powerful moment, really, when I first saw the footage. And I'll share the longer film later on, perhaps. But I kind of think it got me thinking a lot about the lack of care shown to him on his ride to school. We do a lot of work promoting the walk and the ride to school, but the lack of care that was given to him on this quarter-mile trip to school is really kind of got me thinking. And it's very much, I think, about preparing him for a life of automobility. So whether he's thinking about it or not, basically his ride to school was teaching him, one day it's all right, son, because you'll have a car and you can be away. It's horror. As happened to me, So I've got two strands to my work, which kind of intersect in strange ways. Both happened at a similar kind of time. I applied for a job with an organization called Transport Action Network. So the Stop I-45 work we heard about yesterday, Transport Action Network do a lot of that stuff in the UK. The Silvertown Tunnel campaigning against that, Stop the A66, all sorts of road schemes around the UK. TAN will help you out if you want to campaign against it. But I think they got a little bit sick of doing that really hard work, you know, all the judicial reviews, all the kind of legal challenges, because there's obviously a much healthier and more positive story to tell. And that's why they managed to get some funding to create a campaign around traffic reduction, which I was fortunate enough to be able to get involved in from the start. I job share with a chap called Roger Geffen, who's a long-time Cycle UK member. So he's kind of the policy chap, and I'm the visual marketing kind of person. So Low Traffic Future. Again, I'll post the link in the chat. We welcome new members. We're an alliance of organisations around the country. A lot of the usual suspects, you know, the environmental companies, organisations. We're kind of desperate for more to join. There's no cost, because we think, well, there is a definite need for traffic reduction as part of the climate change stuff. We're going to have to reduce traffic by about 20% quite quickly, actually. And the DFT modelling is showing that traffic's going to go up by as much as 50% in the next 20, 30 years, which is not an option for a lot of reasons. So yeah, get involved with that. And at the same time, I joined my local Green Party because they've noticed that I was doing some campaigning, got involved with them, got swept up in that, and ended up standing to be a councillor on Wirral Council. And and now about a year ago got elected to represent the people of Bevington, which is a suburb that I've lived in my whole life, pretty much since the age of 4. And it's a real honour to do that job. And it's kind of doing these two things at the same time is tricky, because I have to obviously telling the story online to residents when I'm door knocking and sending leaflets through their doors is quite an interesting balance. Because I've got a kind of sort of a C-list Twitter celebrity post that will kick off, and I've got quite good at knowing what to post with combining imagery with words. I've had to change it a little bit since I've become an elected official. I've got a code of conduct I need to follow. But yeah, I like to Twitter or X. It's a really good place to explore language, imagery, visuals, learning from lots of folks in this room that I've met. It's been amazing to get to know you. So yeah, it's been really, I still like to play on there and try and push the limits of what I'm allowed to say. This is an example of the kind of literature we put out as councillors. So we door knock every Friday around the ward. We try and get around the whole ward over the course of the year. And we leaflet every quarter to every house in the ward. My phone number's on the leaflets, so we're very much available, and we try our best to keep on top of stuff. And I was quite, in the run up to the election, I was quite, I was keen to kind of try out that idea that people that campaign on safe streets and lower speed limits do well in elections, because I'd heard about it and I thought, oh, well, I might as well try and see if it works, because we'll see. And we did, we went pretty hard, you know, and we really pushed the walking, the cycling, lower speed limits, safer roads, you know, getting zigzags repainted outside of schools, and lo and behold, yeah, it worked. And we were the top 3 polling candidates by quite a distance in the whole of Wirral. So yeah, that kind of backs up the argument that this stuff's really popular, you know. And so beyond that, harnessing the power of potholes and school traffic, and how transport is inherently political. So this is what I'd like to talk around, how I tailor the message really. In a ward which is very car dependent, so there's about 80% car ownership in Bevington where I live. People don't even realise it, probably, my lovely residents, but they are, a lot of them, super addicted to getting in the car for every trip, you know, no matter how short or long. And they're not evil people by any stretch, they're amazing ward actually, but it's so habitual to just get in the car and move that we can't even see the horror that we've created. So for me, to get elected, and the things I talk about when I'm knocking on doors, is very much answering questions, you know, things they complain about. And school traffic is a big one. There's a lot of schools in my ward, maybe 6 or 7 primary schools, 3 or 4 secondary schools. So we have these 2 periods a day when the traffic just goes absolutely crazy, and the kind of peace and quiet of the suburbs is just, turns into a hellscape. And this is an example. This is the kind of the walk or the ride home from school that I see every day, which is, and like I say, if you want to change this stuff, you have to get involved politically. Tailoring the message. So I do change the message depending on who I'm talking to. I showed this slide to a group of 6-7-year-old children on Monday, actually. So Sometimes I like to be quite forceful with my messaging, but also a little bit kind of funny and witty. This is from a Twitter person, and I think there's a War on Cars sticker you can get of this. But you know, when I'm talking to young kids at primary school on Monday, they're very aware of climate change and plastic pollution. You know, they do a lot in schools about it. But when it comes to kind of auto mobility, it's kind of an unspoken thing. We don't talk about how we're going to stop traffic or that kind of thing. And a lot of the road safety messages that they get from the police and kind of the formal road safety organisations are very much grown-ups coming in and telling them how to cross the road safely, not addressing the underlying risk, which is something I like to really go at, you know, straight away. And catching phrases like this are quite useful, I find. Yeah, but also beyond kind of whinging about the niggling potholes and the traffic, having a vision is important too. So obviously I've done my pilgrimage to the Netherlands a couple of times now. This is from a street 10 minutes walk outside the centre of Haarlem, where we stayed last year on a family holiday. And this was amazing because this is actually a scene which is very similar to Bevington, where I live. It's leafy, beautiful houses, tree-lined streets, but obviously the traffic is reduced. Got a couple of kids there cycling on their way to or from school, I'm not sure. It's just, this is an image I use when I'm talking to residents about how little changes we can make to our streets could improve everything, you know, the health, the look of the streets, maybe even you could start to talk about the value of the houses, that kind of thing, because who wouldn't want to live on a street like this? So it's quite an easy sell. Yeah, I've only been a councillor for a year, so I feel a bit of a fraud standing here because I haven't delivered that much yet, just getting up to speed. But we have just delivered quite a significant 20-mile-an-hour project on Wirral, which was sort of ongoing as I was getting elected, and we've done the next phase quite recently. But it came with all the usual kind of drama that you see online, you know, a small number of people creating a real storm for the councillors on that certain committee and the officers in charge of delivering it. But I'm glad to say that we've managed to kind of weather that storm. 170 roads in my ward changed to 20 mile an hour in the space of like 2 weeks over the Easter. Absolutely remarkable. So I was sort of braced for the emails to start rolling in and the phone calls, but nothing, not a thing. Didn't get what happened. Had one email. I think one of my fellow councillors in Bevington got maybe one email about something, but people are ready for it because we prepared them for it in all our literature, you know, years in advance. And yeah, lots of them are just roads that should have always been 20 mile an hour, and it just feels like, that's been quite remarkable. And yeah, we have a lot of cyclists in Bevington, but they're not cyclists in the term that people might think. In my ward, they know they're not Lycra folks heading off for the weekend. This is an actual scene at one of the secondary schools in the heart of my ward. And like literally all the way around here, this fencing and all the way around here, there's mountain bikes piled up. So obviously it's all boys that ride to school. So we've got a lot of work to do, getting more girls feeling safe. But we got a real kind of market ready to go there. And I get a lot of emails about them riding on the pavement on the way to school, you know, causing a bit of hassle, dangerous, that kind of thing. So for me, it's very easy then to just say, well, why don't we just give them bit of space on the road, you know, that's currently being occupied by rows of parked cars, and people don't really tend to argue too much back with that, because especially when I can back it up with an image from somewhere else and you can see it, it's like, oh yeah, I get it. And of course, not just cyclists, the marginalised pedestrians of Bevington as well, many of whom are elderly or kind of struggling with mobility and could never think of driving anyway. They are, you know, there's a lot of work we need to do making my ward fully accessible. You know, not just getting the Range Rovers off the pavement, but yeah, the drop curbs, the cracked pavements, all that kind of thing that we've got that we need to sort quite urgently and quickly if we can. And yet I'm going around taking mad photos of this. So whenever there's snow, which isn't that often, I'm quickly out taking photos of the snack down. So this, you can't see it that well here, but this is a roundabout, which I was there straight away as the snow fell, because I just knew I would get this amazing data on how much space we're wasting on it. And this is a roundabout where a pedestrian was killed, an elderly gentleman about 3 years ago, crossing the road, because he had so, you know, the distance that he has to cross. It's so great. The risk is higher. So, you know, I'm able to show officers why don't we just reclaim a bit of that space and improve the safety, enable more children to walk to school, etc., etc. And on the same roundabout right here, this is something else that now I'm a councillor, I can really hammer home to officers and other councillors. This is almost as good as it gets for cycling infrastructure in my ward. So this, it's just on the other side. There's a little slip road that runs here, which has got some houses on it. And what happens is the kids will ride along, cross the pavement there, and then quickly go down this bit of hill, which is really fun. And then you've got like a quarter-mile safety on this little side street where no cars are driving. And the real horror and the tragedy of this is that I know this well because I used to ride down this when I was 10 years old. So it's been like this for 30 years, gently wearing away, so we've got actual like signs that we've been given for years and years that previous councillors have completely ignored. And maybe just because they're just not open to seeing this stuff. But this is the kind of stuff I see. So this is cycling infrastructure and its demand for cycling in my ward, which I can now kind of bang on about. Zoe talked about Sustrans. So we're lucky, again, before I was a councillor, probably because I was such a polite but nagging campaigner, I managed to make sure that Bevington was selected as the potential livable neighbourhood in the Liverpool City region. It was chosen largely because of so many schools, but Sustrans were brought along to do a real big community co-design effort to redesign Bevington, really, to make it a safer place to walk and cycle, and to hang around, to sit, more benches, that kind of thing. So that was done over the last 18 months or so. It was sort of done out of the low traffic neighbourhood. Not fiasco, but obviously the council had seen how much kickoff there'd been about low traffic neighbourhoods, but wanted to deliver stuff, but we can't call it a low traffic neighbourhood. So there are a few little elements of traffic filters in there. It's sort of a low traffic neighbourhood on steroids. But now the trouble is now that we've done this amazing work with Sustrans, been finished for probably about a year, and now we're just at that stage stuck where are we going to actually deliver it? So I was talking at a big Liverpool City region event couple of weeks ago, and I grabbed a microphone with all these senior officers there talking about how great this project was, and I was like, well, yeah, we finished it a year ago, because there's a risk of not consulting properly and working with the community, but then there's a risk to me and everyone else of not delivering what the people want. So I was like, give us the 10 million quid that I've seen that we need to do all this stuff. Surely the money is there. We've got the business case. We know how great it is. All that walking and cycling index data is amazing, and I use that quite regularly. But are we actually going to do any of this stuff or not? So yeah, that's what I'm kind of hoping we'll be able to move forward soon. So yeah, just summing up really how I talk to residents. I focus on place. I don't talk much, even though I've done a lot of I've done climate literacy, carbon literacy training. I've delivered all that stuff. I don't tend to talk about climate change too much because it just goes over people's heads. People are busy, they've got all sorts going on in their lives. So I focus on place, improving the Bevington. I don't tend to talk about geopolitics too much, but every now and again someone will want to know more about that, and I'm obviously well versed, and generally I keep it simple. I focus on walking mainly. I don't think folks in Bevington are quite ready to go all out on cycling just yet, even though we've got a lot of cyclists about. So I do tend to focus the conversations around walking initially. I try and help people visualize, and I'll take time to explain things. So during the livable neighborhood stuff, there were a couple of design sessions where they sort of kicked off a little bit, and the Reform and the Freedom Alliance folks, God bless them, got wind of this thing that was happening in Bevington, and they came in anger to say, oh, we're going to take away your parking spaces and all that kind of thing. And they managed to whip up a bit of storm, and I got some phone calls from residents. But it wasn't actually that they were going to take parking spaces away from the residents, they were going to formalise it. The plan is to formalise it and make it resident-only parking, which they were in love with straight away, because they can't park outside the houses because all the teachers are parking there and the parents are coming in. So I very quickly was then able to turn it around and say, oh yeah, it's going to be great. You'll be able to park easier now, and there'll be less traffic. So yeah, taking the time to explain is important. Champion inclusivity as much as I can, the kind of women and children first. That's another Radiohead lyric. Yeah. Surprise to anyone that tell me the tune later on. But yeah, I've done quite a lot of work. I've tried to really learn up and on inclusivity in transport, which is so important. And to remember finally that the work is never done. You know, even you go to the Netherlands, they're still knocking down junctions, redesigning them, changing the capacity, redoing roads after they've learned stuff. So I try not to get too focused on the final thing because it's never done, isn't it? There will always be, but as we found in the last couple of days, there's always going to be new challenges that arise from different ways of traveling and that kind of thing. So try and remember that it's always ongoing. And the end goal for me isn't the cycling. It's not the cycle lanes. It's not even the walking. It's about being able to just walk to the chippy in quiet and walk back in in relative safety and just safe in the knowledge that your area is kind of looking out for you. So yeah, that's the end game.
I mean, I don't have any particular expertise here, so if anyone wants to start us off, either online or in the room. Yeah, Pearl?
Yeah, Ed, what you were saying about children being very aware of climate change and plastics, but not automobility, really resonated with me, the conversations that I've had with some of them. And I think we might have a kind of thread running through a lot of the conversations we've been having this weekend about the agency and vulnerability of children, and play as a powerful act, like I know we had with Danny earlier, and Alison Stenning mentioned how it can be an empowering thing, not just for the children, for the whole community in them making changes. And then there was that discussion with Silke yesterday about the adultism in the images, which it's not a framing I exactly agree with, because I think that children are qualitatively different from adults. And in fact, it's the fact of their vulnerability that means we need to protect them, and we have to stop the Kindermord campaigns, is because they can't make the choices that we can as adults. But I think what all these examples did show was the control of children, and what you were mentioning as well about the not wanting them to cycle on the pavements and cycle in that little track that Alison showed that had been blocked off, and that anything they do is a nuisance. If it's in public space. So I just wonder how we can use that kind of duality of empowering them and them having power, but recognizing also their vulnerability in a campaign.
Oh gosh, yeah. Just as a little note to the kind of how we don't attack automobility. If you ever go to like a Chester Zoo for me, so they have a big, in the gift shop, they have a big section of books around environmentalism, and there's nothing there about cars and gas boilers.
It's a supercar zoo,
Yeah.
I mean, they have like one little.
So very much when I do talks to kids, I've been to a lot of schools. Unfortunately, I go straight for it. It's cars and it's gas boilers. All right, we got to sort those two things really quickly. Because again, there's no books about gas boilers.
It's not very sexy.
Yeah, I could do a talk about air source heat pumps as well. There's another workshop, but amazing things. But yeah, so maybe there's a space for writing more children-focused books around it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't mention school streets, which we've got 6 on Wirral, which have been quite successful, and we've got plans for a lot more. So rolling out school streets, en masse is a big thing for me.
I would also like to add, I didn't talk about Critical Mass. I did found a Critical Mass group in Bristol 10 years ago. And I think getting parents out with young children, initially I found that quite daunting, of like, oh, even though I'm ready, used to cycling quite regularly, putting my child on my bike as this, vulnerable entity, like, oh, and then as soon as I did it, I had regretted that it'd taken so long. And so that's why I kind of started that group. But getting families and children out in large groups, I think, this year was amazing. And we saw across the country, Critical Massive, huge rides actually with so many children on the street. And there was that, I guess, that sense like a critical mass bike ride where you have so many people. There were lots of marshals usually as well, making it a safe space for them. But I think actually highlighting the fact that they deserve that space as well, that they should have just as much right to it as large Range Rover or what have you, and giving them a bit of that sense of power and agency. I mean, my child played out on our street from the age of 3, and that was when I started critical mass as well. So Felix is used to taking up that space, and now as a 13-year-old, when I cycle, I just get a bit taking the hands off the handlebars and all of that, and cycling, in primary position, but still, like, I know you want to own the street, child, but I'm still your mom, and I'm still worried because the cars may not respect that, even if you have the right now, because the highway code has changed to protect the most vulnerable, but I don't get the sense that drivers actually are aware of that.
No. I think Mike,
You go to Mike online first.
Do you want to go Mike first and then Martin and then whoever, Mike, we're listening to you.
Okay, thanks. So it picks up on that really. It's a bit of a question about preaching to the converted versus speaking to the people who actually need to change and do things differently. We're all here because we're interested, and I haven't heard tremendously, and I just to say, I agree with what's being said here. I'm not the dissenting voice, but equally I haven't heard any dissenting voices here. How do we have those communications and actually affect change, which needs to be societal change? And I probably think there's a question about when that happens as well. What we've been doing and talking about often has been creeping change. So getting to kids when they're younger, so they're trying to instill these sorts of things, which will then play out, but we need to make these changes now. So how, I don't know, does anyone have any suggestions? How do we do that? Car drivers don't listen, I tend to find, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And I'm a driver as well.
So I've been reading a lot about left-wing populism and how to not have, someone sent me this book by Chantal Mouffe, which was about kind of like, I think it came out in the last 3 or 4 years. And it links to your talk actually about bridging, these two different forms of left-wing resistance into one. And I think, I don't know how we do that, but the way that the right wing and the anti-environmental movement is using very easy tactics to block, these left-wing wokes are going to stop you from driving your work. How can we flip that around so that we say, actually, it's cheaper, it's healthier to cycle? So I think there needs to be more of a kind of an aggressive, blunt, and quite dirty and impure, because the left is so bad at fracturing into different splinters, and we need to be much more populist, I think. And I think to your question there, Mike, that's how I see it. But I don't know how that would operationalize in practice, but just a bit more of a forceful, but maybe more of a simplistic approach.
Actually, the word populism just came to mind to me as well when you just before you said it, and I think that's how the right wing side gets it.
Yeah, that's right.
They use populism, and I think maybe the left needs to utilize those tactics a bit more.
Like Elsa mentioned, for example, in Paris, they just give people £500 to buy a bike. Everyone.
300 euros, plus 400 euros.
These kind of things, can really help.
Well, yeah, but that needs policy. That needs indeed people getting involved in politics.
But that to me is popular.
But absolutely, giving money to people for a specific thing that is bike purchase. That's extremely powerful. But also the fact is that Anne Hidalgo, the mayor, in the meantime, had also built the infrastructure to make it also less unsafe.
I mean, that was the thing that I was interested in. A lot of the talks were, when we think about transport, we can get kind of sucked into thinking about A to B movement, like the idea is the motion through space and time. But I think both Ed at the end with the chips and Zoe talking about the places to dwell, there's this kind of idea about how do we fit different needs in, and that requires investment. I was just sort of thinking about the ways that if we do have, let's say we go to something that's much more walking focused, and a lot of that means that services and things need to be closer. You need places to stop, like public toilets, that people will need to, and that kind of thing. So maybe kind of part of it is a sort of politics and as we sort of saying about what tactics do we use, but some of it is also literally about investment in the infrastructure, because people won't do it. You need that first. I think there's a chicken and an egg argument here, isn't there? Obviously, you need the sort of support in order to justify making the investments, but without those investments to show it's possible, it's difficult to kind of convince people. So I think there is a sort of an idea there about actually what do we need to help people move? What do we need to help people stop? And how do we make that sort of investment possible?
I think your secret weapons of women and children are quite good. I think it is really also about highlighting, well, also elderly people, or people with disabilities. Because I think as soon as you make it less of a sort of culture war discourse between two things, that you make it something about actually, you know, this is something for children, this is something for older people, and changing some of that narrative. I mean, I'm often trying to find a different route.
Yeah, because those are the people who have the sustainable mobility patterns, so to support them. And I mean, I think that should happen much more.
Mike, did you want to respond to that?
Well,
And then,
just
and
think
then
about this. Sorry,
and
yeah,
then-
just because it's so I've looked at this in historical context, and children and the elderly were kind of mobilised as groups of particular concern from the 1920s at least, and it just didn't make a difference. And organisations like the Pedestrians Association, they didn't have the traction to be able to change the what became the dominant narrative at that point, and has remained so. Again, we talked about this yesterday and earlier about, you know, who has the power in these organisations and the lobbying groups and so on. So you're right about everything you said, and a really horrible question to ask, sorry, because it's so difficult, it's so intractable. But there's some sort of fundamental change which has to happen, and I don't disagree with trying to kind of make use of the vulnerabilities and so on to argue for better change and more inclusive environments. I think it's really difficult to do because what's been tried in the past hasn't worked, and they have thought along those lines before.
But they were also acting in a different context. Now we have more women MP than ever. So I'm hoping that
That's
the
a completely
context.
different, yeah.
Alison, Martin, and then Alison.
No, I've made my
You've
contribution.
made your
Yeah, that was it. Sorry,
Okay,
yeah.
Alison, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think I'm getting to the point where I'm kind of like thinking about kind of less populism and more kind of authoritarianism. I mean, I think there is this sense in which, you know, I mean, and you know, it's like everyone always talks about this, you know, this is always a kind of common response on Twitter and in other kind of, you know, sort of activist circles, but, you know, we don't ask permission to build roads, we don't ask permission to do all sorts of other things in our cities. So why do we keep asking permission to create space for stuff that we know? And, you know, the evidence is there. There's no absence of evidence in terms of kind of why we need to do this, whether that's about, you know, safety and space and kind of, you know, access to the city and the rights to the city, or whether it's about climate and, you know, and air quality and all of those kinds of things. We know why we need to do this. And I suppose, you know, obviously we have a bunch of kind of quite shy politicians of all kind of colours and at all scales. But I think, you know, clearly this is a moment where things shift. We have a government that now has a significant majority that is in place for 5 years, that has made these commitments. I mean, who knows what to, but I think, you know, this sense that we keep wanting to kind of convince people that this is the right thing to do. We don't do that with anything else really in terms of how we shape our cities. We just reshape our cities, and we've been doing that for decades. And, you know, and I've always kind of, you know, there's always been a part of me that thinks, well, yeah, you know, you can't really complain about children playing. You can't say that children shouldn't play in that space, and which is why one of the reasons why I think play streets is such a powerful thing. But I think I've got to the point now where I'm like, we keep arguing, we keep trying to convince people, and I think we just have to, I mean, it's not us that's doing it, but I think, you know, we need bold politicians who are prepared to take risks.
Absolutely.
And I think, like, I'm talking here more as an active travel activist, we also have to find ways to respond when there's a vociferous minority that you know, the backlash that some of those minorities can be extremely effective really at removing road filters, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we respond to those very loud minorities, and how do we change culture? Because also I was thinking, listening to you, Ed, it's wonderful that you got those 20 miles per hour signs, but it's all over my neighborhood and literally like one every other driver. And it's not just men, it's, you know, everyone doesn't respect them. So how do we change also that culture where just everyone, like, there's no more indeed care for the others, there's no more respect for the law in a country that, you know, historically has this culture of like, respecting the law. So Nassim.
Yeah, I was going to say I was in the Velocity at Ghent not last week, the week before, and one of the gentlemen taking us around the tour, he said exactly what you're talking about. He said we decided as officers we could no longer, we kept designing more and more spaces for cars, and the more spaces we designed in, the more cars we got, and that's when we realized we've got to stop designing for cars and we've got to start designing for people. And he said, and then when we first brought that up, he said the amount of vociferous campaigning by a certain minority was just unbelievable. He said, but we decided this is what we were going to do. City officers were in line with the politicians, and we did it. And he said, for a few months we had to go around with bulletproof vests on. He said one or two of the politicians got bullets in their post, things like that. He said, but now these are the same people who are now all benefiting, because now we have more people who own bikes than cars. We have traffic, but it's all actually routed out from the main city centre. Most of the places where you are in the city centre are now plazas, so to speak, pedestrianised kind of areas. And he said, and now it's the people who are actually the only people who can come through in their cars are the police, the fire, or ambulance, and everybody else, or certain delivery types. They are given certain types of, but they still have to manage it by having cameras so that anybody goes in that shouldn't be in. They have a APNR type of registration, and they still get 6 weeks. No, not 6 weeks. They still got 48 hours if they accidentally did it, or if some emergency happened. They suddenly wanted to take someone to hospital or something. They were allowed to, within 48 hours, put their case and they would be forgiven. But beyond that, no. He said, but anyone who shouldn't be there, we will prosecute, because we knew if we didn't do that, there'd be a rumour saying, oh, they're not really. The 20-mile thing you're talking about, if nobody's going to be prosecuted for not going over 20 miles, who cares? So these are the kind of things we really have to think about. That if we're going to do it, we have to do it, and then we have to enforce it. And I think that's where we usually kind of fall down, and then friends and neighbours will hate you, Ed, but that's the way it is.
I know that, and enforcement, I know John always has powerful.
Not into enforcement, well, not into the police more specifically. So just one other thing though is about, like, again, Chantal Mouffe is relevant here, like the idea of articulation, of linking like an articulated bus, like linking things that don't necessarily need to be linking through the speech act of articulation, like bringing things together. So what that would more mean in an on the ground way is, when you have an active travel event, bring in other groups who are working on seemingly other kinds of issues. We had a Better Streets event recently. It was just a small thing. It was a little pedestrianized bit of road, and the city council had done it, and there was no fuss. It was just kind of there. We thought, oh, well, let's celebrate this space. Let's actually do something. So let's invite. So we had someone to do the bike repair. So it was like an active travel-y kind of thing. But we had we asked the Big Ride for Palestine people came. The people who are doing the work on gentrification in the neighborhood came. The people who are working on saving the local reservoir, like we invited these different groups, others I'm forgetting, and there was just a little row of tables. And one of the best parts was seeing the people at the different tables talking to each other, right? And so it was just about, oh yeah, like the people who are working on saving the reservoir are like, you guys are against cars? Like, that's so weird, like, and then it's like, oh, well, let's talk some more, and then you can kind of do it. So it's not always about like convincing the people who are going to want to block that bike track, Allison, like the ones that are going to be hardcore, but also people who have like maybe an adjacent issue, it might seem, and just making it a little bit more of a connection, because otherwise our active travel conversation remains super insular.
Tina?
Yes, just going back to that, what Mike said about history being depressing in this sense. So I have often this feeling, because I have been studying the history of non-motorized modes for some, 10 years at least, a little bit more even, and it shows you this. I mean, first of all, the power of car lobby is really something that we have to keep in mind, and it's a major thing. And then that, for example, in 60s, 70s, when, for example, Finland had just motorized, they saw the problems. They saw them very clearly, the activists, and they really tried to counteract the problems, and it was not very successful. So, for example, also transport as an equality issue never got really taken into account in the same way as equality has. I mean, for example, gender equality was quite successful in other senses in Finland, but not in transport. So what is it? What is it about transport? So it can make you quite depressed to see how things just get kind of worse and worse. But then again, when I look at the 50s, we had a sustainable transport system, more or less. So it was there, it just got dismantled. So of course, that's also a depressing thought, but we have had it. It's not like some magic thing, and it's human made, so we can make it happen. So there is both. And last thing, what I realized now that we published this graphic novel, me and Tito together, that people get very surprised when you show them that how the situation was not that long ago and why it changed. So that it was not like a coincidence that they really actively marginalized, for example, cycling. That was the biggest vehicle mode. People are super surprised. They don't know about that. I, of course, think everyone knows already because I have been doing research on it, but no, they don't. So just also telling it over and over again, this is not like a natural thing that things are the way they are. They have been built and we can rebuild them. So
I agree 100%. I just wanted to quickly come in on that with something that's in all of our collective memories, which is during the pandemic, people did actually completely shift their mode. We had a massive behavior change event a couple years ago, and it took leadership. We didn't actually even change that many of the streets. It just was because people weren't using them in their cars. And I think we need to think about those examples where people can actually remember, what was it like to listen to the birds? What was it like not to be choking through the diesel fumes and all of that, or to feel like your kids were safe? That we have that in our memories. We need to bring that to the fore.
Just thinking about time, because we also need to give Anna a break.
That's true.
But we've got John, because I don't know if we want to, John.
Yifan had also raised her hand, so can we just have Yifan and John asking their questions, and maybe we might have to just leave these questions hanging and take them up later.
Yeah, maybe we can gather them up and address them in the next session.
Yifan first?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how there is this really deep moralization of speed in the current capitalistic society, where you're always having to go, like you need to be fast, you need to get to places just in time, you need to not wait, because waiting wastes the amount of money you could be making at your job or somewhere else, that sort of becomes so embedded in your psyche that I guess it attaches to the effective experience of driving itself. Even as you drive, even though the car promises you speed, promises you that shortened amount of time, people experience road rage, for example, if you are forced to wait behind traffic, or if you get cut by another person in front of you. And I just wonder, the elephant in the room is really just, we are in this really late stage capitalism where everything is just embedded in the logics and the practices that we have, that is very difficult to entangle. And I wonder if what Alison was saying about how we should have a little bit more of a heavy hand in terms of being authoritative in our policies and whatnot, to actually get things rolling and not sort of wait around for things to change.
That slide that you had yesterday.
I'm sorry, Andrew. I just have to be a bit authoritative here.
I'll put that.
And John, I think we were going to leave the last word to John, who's.
I'll just put it in the chat so you can move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so John was saying, we have found in design coding conversations that people self-selecting tend to naturally move towards designing livable neighborhoods. How do we diffuse these processes to inoculate against the populist perspective? I think that's definitely a question we've been coming back again and again. And I encourage you to keep all those thoughts going, and we're gonna take a 10-minute break, right? And we'll be back for our streets.
So Johnson, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back for our final session, Our Streets. Because I already presented, I was like, I'm done, but actually I do need to chair the session. I'm very happy to do so. So we have 4 speakers. I'll introduce Casper first. He's going to speak first. And Casper is a transport campaigner, and he has been since joining Stop Killing Cyclists for Ying Tao's death in 2016. He's also been involved in many other direct action campaigns here in Exeter and London since then, including arranging a die-in for Maria Pereira Gonzalez in 2021 and a Safer Streets Now actions in Exeter early this year. So I'm going to ask, I've already asked them informally, but I'm going to ask our speakers to keep to 10 minutes each. And then you're gonna be like, oh, Johnson, he's a jerk. I didn't realize that, because you'll see if you get to 10 minutes, I'll be like this.
Can you give me a 5 minute and then a minute?
I can give you a 5 minute
And
and a
then every
minute.
minute afterwards would be great.
Casper, over to you.
Right, okay, so this one's next, right. So the way I approach campaigning is that we need to focus on what needs to be done, not what is politically possible, and right this second, there's a gulf between the two. There's that one in here. Who am I? Deeply concerned parent trying to create a safer future for my son. Basically, he's 17, and the way it's looking at the moment is pretty dire. We're teetering on the edge of societal collapse. If you speak to various scientists that work out this uni, actually, many of whom I know. So to give you a quick skitter through some of the things I've been involved with, this was Rupert Murdoch's printing press. We blocked it for 13 hours, caused £3 million worth of damage, nearly got Priti Patel up on a limb to abuse of power going through court. And the PCSE bill, basically the state didn't like it and referenced this action directly, because ultimately what happened was the Chief Constable of Hertfordshire Police heard from Rupert Murdoch and the government before he heard from his Deputy Chief Constable that we had there doing this. So then the next one is a quick skip through other things I've done. Me on the edge of this is the wooden surround of the copy of The Last Supper in the Royal Academy. You can't see the guy that came to me after the oil terminals action, just said, basically, really love the oil terminals action that Just Stop Oil did. That came from a transport campaigner's mind. And he said, have you ever read, what is it, Art of War? Attack your enemy where your enemy is not. I'm like, oh yeah, what's your plan? And he said this. So we organised a load of these, and these culminated in Soup Over Sunflowers that was viewed by 90 million people. So that worked. That was a good media hit. Another one that I did, there's me. This is Regent's Park after a driver had hit some people cycling. Cars shouldn't be in parks. I mean, it's quite simple. So we turned up in the morning before they opened the park, locked ourselves at the gate and said, cars shouldn't be in this park. Didn't really do anything. So yeah, we might have already crossed the threshold for the cascade of interrelated tipping points. Tim Lenton is from Exeter University Global Systems Institute. Actually, he's the granddaughter of Lily Lenton, who was one of the women wreckers in the suffragettes. So the suffragettes did an arson and bombing campaign, and there was 10 of them in the centre of suffragettes. She was one of those. Also, hunger strikes lost, and he's her grandson. So yeah, so like, I mean, this is out of date. I've just realised last year was now this. This says 75% chance of 2020 being the hottest year. Last year was the hottest year. This graph is terrifying. We really are teetering on the edge of societal collapse, and also in my lifetime, World Wildlife Foundation says that, and the Zoological Society says that 70% of nature has been destroyed in 152. It's gone. I mean, we only need to go out and look around here. Dartmoor's totally denuded of trees. Used to be 70% tree cover like the UK. It's now 13% like the UK. We've wrecked it. Moving on to transport. The reason that the Netherlands is like it is because these guys popped up in 1971 doing Stop the Kindermoord. It started with a school teacher, actually, who was disgusted at the fact that 400 kids and 3,000 people had been killed by drivers. So he said, how do we change this? Let's do a die-in. They did a die-in. Within 10 years, the entire built environment had changed in the Netherlands. So they built this up to, this is the one outside Rickman's, what's the museum? Right, Rickmanstrato, which is the museum in Amsterdam. And it was really, really influential. There was lots of flashpoints. There was lots of violence. They were really clever in using the kids as well. So the kids were they were platforming children who were asking really clever questions of politicians, and it worked. And basically now the Netherlands have got this incredible outreach that a lot of you in here know about, where they go to other states and talk to them about how to change their built environment to make it safer for people who walk and cycle. And it started because of this group called Stop the Kindermoord, which is what Stop Killing Cyclists was based on, which is what I was very much involved with in London, which is what I joined in 2016. And what we were saying at that time is that in 2016, you then said that 20% of the transport budget should be spent on active travel. I'm sort of contradicting myself here, because if we were genuinely talking about adjusting the spend to deal with the climate and ecological crisis, because transport is the largest emitting sector in the UK, then we would be spending about 90% of that on public and active travel and 10% on road maintenance, because we need roads for HGVs and coaches and stuff like that, which need to be electrical powered. But we said back then that 20% of the transport budget, we protested outside the Department of the Treasury in this country, and that was £6 billion. At the moment, we've got less than £1 a head. That would be about 80 quid a head. The outgoing government, as of today, cut that budget to £1 a head. It's 5 minutes. Thank you. Cool. I'm doing all right. To give you an idea of how society can accept radical change, through COVID, enough of the population accepted that really radical change, or you have to be locked into your house, in order to stop tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people dying over here. So this is just to show that if the government and crucially the media align behind a sensible evidence-based message, was evidence-based in this case, then society can and will accept really, really radical changes. I'm not so sure that, because of what the media has done post the pandemic, I'm not entirely sure that that would actually be true now. If you see what the right-wing press is writing, it would be more difficult. But also during lockdown, it's worth noting that the drop in transport emissions and pollution we saw during lockdown was what we need in order to meet the IPCC's goal of 45% drop by 2030. And have we seen that since? No. So we've got worse since back in, we're now back to pre-pandemic levels of traffic in the UK. There's some other direct action that works really, really well in this country, but from the right, was the fuel crisis of 2000, the fuel strikes of 2000, which was started by some farmers and then some hauliers, and they blockaded 7 refineries in this country, 7 petrol and oil refineries in this country, and they blockaded motorways. And what happened was, I mean, you can just see people died in queuing to get fuel for their cars. So basically what the press did, the whole thing lasted 8 days. Day 4, the Sun started writing about it. Day 5, every article in the Sun newspaper and the News of the World at that time was about the fuel crisis. They were telling people that do not panic buy, knowing full well that everybody would go out and panic buy. Petrol stations only had 3 days worth of petrol in it, so they had to control the petrol going to the petrol stations and empty the petrol stations of their petrol. Schools couldn't operate, hospitals were struggling, shelves were emptying, and these guys won. The guy that organised it was a farmer in Wales. He became a Tory MEP for Wales after he successfully did this. It worked. Direct action works. So what this has stopped is about 180 billion pounds being spent on being paid for on fuel duty in the UK. Since then, since this, they threatened it a couple of times. Every now and again, the government says, "Oh, we're going to toy with putting fuel duty back on," and somebody will say, "Oh, we'll do a blockade." And then they Oh, no, can't do that. It's quite simple. Direct action works. Oh yeah, we'll do a little bit more detail. So, and there was a little bit of violence in this. The way that it started, excuse the low res, the way that it started was farmers were blockading one of the fuel refineries, and the HGV drivers were scared of being beaten up by the farmers. So they basically had a choice. We join them, or we think we get beaten up. There was enough of a threat from the farmers for them to just join up. Once the fuel tanker drivers joined, that was it. They won. There wasn't a single tanker that moved, apart from the army tankers. 1 minute. Right, okay. So Stop Killing Cyclists worked. Boris Johnson's deputy said that Stop Killing Cyclists did two things. It generated a conversation amongst the general public in London that building a network of cycling lanes would stop people being killed. It lit a fire under their administration to do it. Basically, our previous PM, but five now, has said that the direct action in which I was involved definitely works. So that was based on Stop the Kingdom Ords, which was what was going on in the Netherlands in the 70s. So basically, I also used this as a call when I last did this, as a call to get people to understand, to try and take part in, or get people to take part in direct action. So we did direct action, we did it in Exeter. We got basically me, a blind man, and a whole load of OAPs blocking the roads for Extinction Rebellion. We did this, we created a lane on Barrack Road, and the doctors and everybody, absolutely everybody loved it. And we just turned up with 500 cones, coned it off, did it sensibly. We've got enough traffic now around us to know to make a bus, get access to this bus stop. Then we did the die-in in Exeter for Maria Gonzalez Perez. The driver that killed her was off his nut on NOS when he killed her, and he's got 1 year, 8 months in prison. Absolutely diabolical. So basically, this is my last 2 slides. So we're facing societal collapse. This is what societal collapse looks like in Gaza and Ukraine. That's what it's going to look like here before most people understand it. Or do we get off our asses and make it look like this? In order to do that, we need to be far more radical than we are. And I say that speaking to students from this university that have spent a considerable amount of time in jail. 10 minutes?
Thank you, Casper. Yeah, a little over, but that's okay. Excellent. Okay, great. Let's go to Andrew Hulichan next. Andrew Hulichan is lecturer in planning and director of the MSc in City Planning at the University of Glasgow. He's also a chartered member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. Andrew's work attempts to bridge theory and practice and empirically focuses on urban environmental governance, lived experience, and planning history and theory. Andrew, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
You just to get get you on the slideshow. From beginning, there we go. Oh, sorry. Now I can just click on 1 second.
Do you want to let you know when you get to 9 minutes kind of thing? If you do.
I've got my timer as well, but maybe
Okay.
I think it's okay. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. When you're ready.
Where's the switch?
Yeah, I'm just gonna put the slides. There it is. Basically, I have too many paper. Right. So there we go. That should be it. If we just use paper direction.
All right. Well, thanks, Martin, and thanks for having everyone. So, I don't. This is the officially the sort of activist section, and I suppose I'm in between both. So I don't define myself as an activist, but I'm involved with the activist community as an academic. The main founder of the campaign Replace the M8, Peter Kelly, is not here today, but I did invite him. So I'm also going to be speaking a little bit for him as well. So this is the story of the M8 motorway in Glasgow, which is Scotland's busiest motorway. It slices through Scotland. It's a regional and national motorway, but it has a very specific local impact on the city. And I like this picture because it's very symbolic. It's, you know, it's showing the little pedestrian there trying to get through the 1960s underpass. Glasgow has a very wet climate. These things often flood, and these cars are just sitting, waiting, chugging out emissions, trying to get through the city. Yeah. So the campaign has really, in the last 3 or 4 years, taken hold. It started during lockdown. Glasgow held COP26, and Peter created some visions of how the city might, you know, remove the M8 or remove the scar that M8 has caused in Glasgow, and it's attracted a lot of media attention. We've written to Parliament, and we've even been on Radio 4 as well. So where is the M8? What is the M8? Glasgow actually has the longest amount of urban motorways in the UK, more than London and more than Leeds and more than Birmingham. Urban motorway, yeah? So look how many motorways we have slicing through the metropolitan area. This is the section that we're most concerned about, the inner ring road, which severs the north of the city from the west of the city. And then there are some specific local impacts here. So this used to be, you can see that street coming right down from the northwest. This used to be Anderston, which is where Billy Connolly grew up. And it was a kind of Victorian, bustling, thriving neighborhood that has been completely eviscerated from the map. This is Charing Cross, which has a similar situation. And this is the scale of it. There's some of my students there at the bottom. You can see the enormity of this megastructure. It's eight lanes wide, it's 40 meters high, it has 140,000 cars moving across it, and the Kingston Bridge, which crosses the Clyde, is Europe's busiest urban bridge. The Scottish Green Party has put forward a motion in Glasgow City Council for Glasgow to be a feminist city. It is the UK's first feminist city, and this is my friend Holly Bruce, who is the Green Councillor who put it forward. So the campaign has had a lot of buy-in from what I would call civic society. So my friend Jude Barbara, who's a feminist architect, says at its core the M8 was an outdated macho mindset around planning. Paul Sweeney, the Labour MSP for Glasgow, said it was a savage social engineering and violent exercise carried out on the city in areas with very little resistance. The intangible bonds of social environment that people connected to were being pulled apart. And my friend Bobby Jewell, who some of you might know from ACAN, says that Glasgow has a chance to radically act in a climate emergency and show that decarbonisation of cities can be done through acts of care, maintenance, and long-term thinking that is needed at this crucial time. So we all know this history. This is the kind of the heyday of modernism where this is envisaged. Glasgow is the only city in Britain that had a population of over 1 million for the longest time. Glasgow's population hits 1 million in about 1900 and starts to decline in the 1960s. It was seen as messy, congested, and by 1945 there was a rational modernist utopian Corbusian plan to basically rationalise the city. So originally the idea was to divide the city into concentric rings and zones, and so the first iteration was in 1954. And that was going to be in tandem with comprehensive redevelopment areas, which was going to be pulling apart and pulling down some neighbourhoods. And so this is what we ended up with. Now, when the north and the eastern section was built, the western section was hugely controversial, so the eastern and southern sections were not built. And that actually led to planning blight in these areas, where the uncertainty over whether the motorway would go ahead or not actually led to the decline of these areas. And in the 1980s, the subsequent redevelopment of them as kind of yuppie, kind of hipstery sort of areas. You can see the extent of the damage done there, the urban neighbourhoods that were ripped apart. But by the 1970s, as we all know, there's a range of social and political economic factors that are leading to turning away from this, and this all ties in with Stop the Kindermood and so on. So the current impacts are that it's actually easier to get to travel through the region of Glasgow, and I like there's an architect called Bernard Tschumi he uses this phrase scalar juxtaposition, which I like, which is this idea that if you're standing next to a highway, your scale is like the local, but it's right next to a piece of infrastructure whose scale is regional or national, and that's very much the case in Glasgow. That's a primary school there, a Catholic primary school on the left-hand side, and that's the M8 in Anderston, and those children are exposed to huge levels of air pollution. You can see there it's 3 times and this is going to your point about how you motivate people. Health is one of the things. This is the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. Red is deprived, blue is posh, and you can see the impacts here. So the north of Glasgow and Springburn, there's one bridge that allows this connection into the city centre. This is a huge severance. And then there's the community of Anderston there, which was again ripped apart by the motorway. The west end of Glasgow is the bougie bit. So policy context. Scottish government is very, very good at saying things, very, very bad at implementing things. That's why they only got 4 seats today. And so there's a 75%. So they're saying what we want to do is to reduce emissions by 75%, and they've got various targets for transport. And one of the ideas of the City Council, this was actually a consultant, Austin Smith-Lord, who said we could actually reroute the traffic along this road here. But at the end of the day, we need to remove, we need to reduce private vehicle use significantly. So this is Peter Kelly's Twitter feed. This has replaced the M8. And This is some of the images that he's using to galvanize the public. So Peter says, I began searching for evidence of plans or studies into alternatives to the city centre. I couldn't find anything, so decided that I started a conversation on Twitter. I made a few concept drawings showing the route replaced with urban blocks, parks and boulevards. The drawings were seen by local MSPs and other people. He's had a great privilege to speak to local politicians, academics, architects, planners, and local people who remember the city before the arrival of the M8. And so we actually got a motion passed to the City Council to actually look into an evidence base of how we might take removing the M8 forward in the future. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the issues around legitimacy and you know, going to your point yesterday about actually, do we even need evidence, right? And it's almost sometimes a way of governments to push you off. Oh, we need more data, right? So this is just some of the images. So there was an exhibition set up by Bobby Jewell. It really has generated, it's a loose campaign. It's not really like led by any one person. It's a collection of people in Glasgow that are concerned with about placemaking. Actually, placemaking seems to be the biggest narrative that's coming through. Climate change is also there as well in the background, but a lot of people are really concerned about, you know, the noise impacts, the visual impacts, the economic impacts on the city. So I held a public conversation at the University of Glasgow. We had 120 members of the public who came in. Oh, I've lost my time, sorry. Who came in, and I asked the audience, you know, what should we do with the M8? So I gave them 4 options. 1 was to do nothing. 2 was to cap and cover, so keep the traffic moving, but do a cosmetic thing on top of it. The 3rd one was to rip it up and start again, parks, trams, and boulevards. And the final one was to keep and retain the existing structure for carbon reasons, and to maybe turn it into, like, you know, various different kinds of spaces. A few weeks ago, one of the skate parks underneath the M8, the council said, you can't do that. It's antisocial behaviour. So they blocked it off. You know, that's that. And these poor guys, they're actually making something out of the skate park, and they've just been told F off. So I think there's going to be a bit of a resistance to that. I'm almost finished now. So we managed to get our campaign to council, who listened, and the Deputy Lord Provost, who was also at the event I had at the university, said we owe it to future generations to be as bold as possible in our efforts to design a city fit for the future, greener, more sustainable and healthier. The transport is one of the leading causes of carbon emissions. The focus must be on the motorway to have any meaningful impact. Investigations must commence and explore options to downgrade, reconfigure, and eventually replace some of the sections of the M8 if possible. This is the primary intention of our motion, to reiterate Glasgow City Council's commitment to develop the decision further, and so on and so on. The problem is that the M8 motorway is actually owned by the Scottish government. It's a national highway, yeah? And so when we have had discussions with the Scottish Transport Minister, but what I'm more thinking about now is that this has to be led by national government. This is a national highway with very local impacts, and it opens up this discussion about multi-scalar governance, right? About the nation versus the city, about the region versus the city. And I think there's an element of political risk as well. Like, neither the Scottish government nor the City Council wants to take on the political risk. And I would also say that the campaign is in a very nascent stage. We're quite disorganized at the moment. We don't really have a concrete strategy. And some of the things that you were showing, Casper, about civil disobedience, that's something that we might think about doing, and maybe, like, you know, blocking off one of the side streets and so on. We have had a conversation about getting one of the streets adjacent to it and just closing it for the day and seeing how people use it and kind of raising awareness that way. So it's still very early days. But if you do want a bit of context about the M8 motorway, it's on Radio 4, and it's myself and Jude Barber and the guy from the Scottish Roads Archives who loves motorways, and it's with Alan Little, and it's about the social and political history of Glasgow, but and also urban highway construction in general. So that's that. Am I okay? Perfect. All right. Thanks.
Very good.
Very good.
Thanks,
yes.
Andrew. Pearl Aarons is up next. Pearl is an activist with the new campaign for free public transport in London, Fair Free London. She's a former elected trustee of the London Cycling Campaign, where she led on the board's policy work. She works as a senior transport planner in development planning at an engineering consultancy.
I don't have slides, but I'm just going to read them. So we've just started a campaign for free public transport in London. I'm so pleased that this campaign is happening, because I've been in conversations about it a few years ago and I really came with them. And there's some of the Silvertown Tunnel folks who Ed mentioned earlier, they started the company a few months ago in February. So we're still in the early stages and we're definitely inviting critique and proposals from you guys. So to introduce the idea, it's pretty simple. We're asking the Mayor of London to abolish fares on buses and trains. Free public transport has a dual aim, the social justice aim of reducing costs for existing users and the climate change aim of switching journeys from cars to public transport. Ideally, this would happen all over the country, but we're campaigning in London because we happen to live in London. And outside of London, the public transport campaigns have other things to focus on first before they can get to this. So why I think free public transport is such a good demand is that we're asking for the demonetization of a service. So people have a more direct relationship with their city and its infrastructure. And this means that the state has to invest in public transport as a public good. Free public transport raises all these questions about ownership over the services in the city, real and perceived ownership, sense of pride, and how workers make and control value in a city. It's about the wider principle of access to public services and how those spaces are controlled. When you're talking about demonetization, it's so far outside of the mainstream conversation that it helps to shift people's ideas of what is acceptable and possible to ask for. So I don't really want to campaign for, say, a 30% reduction on some bus routes for NHS workers for them. That would be great if that happened, but it's not catchy, it's not very inspiring, and if it succeeded, it wouldn't be a fundamental change in how we all relate to the place in which we live. So I don't think I need to explain the basic idea any further to this audience. So I want to discuss in some more detail our strategy as a campaign and the question of how much we should care about modal shift from cars versus focusing on existing public transport users. So for context, 55% of Londoners use the bus at least once a week, and about 68% use underground national rail or overground trains at least once a week. DFL says 46% of Londoners don't own a car, and that's obviously more intensive in inner London. So mode shift. Nationally, when survey companies ask people what would make you switch to public transport, people do say cheaper fares, but they also say more and more frequent routes and more reliable services. These three factors kind of juggle around at the top of the list. Cost, more routes with high frequency, and reliability. They're far and away from all the other factors. So a critic of free public transport might say, it would be great if the bus cost less money, but it sometimes doesn't show up at all, and that's a bigger problem for me. And that's what keeps me in my car. It's a fair point. So why are we asking for free public transport when it's not necessarily the most important thing that will make people switch from driving? Because we think free public transport is the means of getting a more frequent, reliable public transport service. It's the means because it necessitates a different investment model. Currently, fares income being the main pot of money for public transport gives inconsistent year-on-year funding and gives the bosses an excuse to cut services for the sake of profit. If there were no fares income, it would mean the state would have to front a consistent funding stream just to have any buses and trains at all. So the implications of free public transport are many, including more secure, reliable jobs. Amongst all the large cities in the world, TfL is unusual in its self-financing model, and it's not resilient to shocks or dips in passenger numbers, such as we saw in COVID. The Tories have forced this model on TfL, particularly recently, and removing TfL from this model would mean transport employers couldn't use drops in fare revenue as an excuse for cutting jobs or attacking workers' conditions. Job security is part and parcel of this because it would be about saying public transport is an indispensable service, like healthcare, and so the workers who keep it running are indispensable too. So making public transport free would almost certainly increase usage, which means you need to increase services, expand stations, and that also means more jobs. So economically, it would be a change in government thinking away from drip feeding little pots of money for discrete projects and towards regular funding sources and long-term thinking, which is something we've been talking about this weekend, this 2 days. So secondly, the implications of free public transport mean we could actually build a public transport system around our priorities as a city and put routes where people really want to go rather than chasing fares income. So for instance, and this might be more important in other cities, we could put on unprofitable bus routes without caring how many people got on them, non-radial routes and night buses and night trains, and lots of fast buses from specific housing estates into the centre of town or to other estates. So in this way, both reliability and frequency could increase because we could plan a public transport system around who needs it most. So that's how I think those three factors, more and more frequent routes, reliability and low cost, are all intertwined. So when you survey the public and they say they want reliability, low cost and more frequent routes, and that would make them switch from driving to public transport, maybe they're right. I don't think we have an example of that policy change coming into effect in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we do know that what happens when we have free public transport and no other changes, driving mode share doesn't change. The combination that's been shown to produce noticeable mode shift, which we know we need, is free public transport and some type of road user charging. So it's a good combination because one subsidizes the other.
Yes.
But road user charging is one of the most difficult policies to get off the ground. We can talk about why. I don't know whether we really want to introduce it into this campaign. This is what we've been going over as a campaign. I've been going over my head. So I'd really appreciate your thoughts on this. So on one hand, we've been getting a really positive response from people so far. And as a campaign, that's really great. There's a sense that public transport users just have to suffer through the price increases. And it's good we're finally doing something to change that. We're talking about freedom and getting things for free, and it's a really positive message. Public transport users are some of the poorest people in society. They can't necessarily afford a car. And free public transport would literally put money back in their pocket for doing the right thing for the climate. So it's kind of a win-win-win policy. So on that hand, mentioning road user charging now would ruin all of that. It would undermine the positive message and it would make it about taxes and trade-offs. But on the other hand, I know that if you don't ask, you don't get. And if we don't ask for some form of car restriction measures, we might sacrifice the prospect of mode shift coming from this campaign. Now, it might be true that if free public transport really was combined with massive investment in new routes, higher frequencies and ensuring a more reliable service, then mode shift would happen anyway. Or it wouldn't, but the benefits would accrue for the existing public transport users. And that would be a big win anyway for social justice and economic justice. But the climate thing is really motivating for me personally. And to give that up seems really deflating. So I want to invite your opinions on how we as a campaign should deal with this issue. I know we were talking about the risks of convergence earlier and what you give up with that. And so crucially, what else could be done as a free public transport campaign in terms of getting that mode shift? Thank you.
Okay, and last but certainly not least, we have Naseem Akhtar. Naseem champions, pioneers, and challenges opportunities in physical activity and sport for ethnically diverse communities, especially Asian women. In 2006, she secured the Saheli Adventure Hub in Balsall Heath, Birmingham, and now she works with over 2,500 women every year. Naseem set up the first ever young girls club for 13 to 25-year-olds, providing opportunities to go rock climbing, skiing, canoeing, cycling, and quad biking. Saheli Cycling Club has taught over 2,500 women how to ride a bike in 3 parks in the city of Birmingham. Naseem, the floor is yours. 10 minutes.
Try and time it, but you can.
Yeah, I'll let you know when it's at 9.
And it's that one, is it?
But because it's for your computer.
Oh,
So you can sit down and do
Out
it
of the way. That's just mine. I can.
okay. Sorry, everyone. So, Naseem Akhtar, CEO of Saheli Hub. Thank you for inviting me. Our mission is to educate, motivate, and inspire women and girls and yeah, there you go. Inspire and empower. We've been around now for 23 years. So why does what I do matter? Well, actually, I live in Balsall Heath in Birmingham, one of the main deprived areas of the city. And if you look at life expectancy of men, most men, on average, if you're white British across the nation, you live to 75. If you are in Birmingham, it's 73. But if you live in Balsall Heath, Washwood Heath, Allen Rock, Ward End, the wards we operate in, most men don't get to 65.
Wow.
So let me repeat that, 75, 73, 65 if you're lucky. And I always tell people my dad died at 60, so I'm a product of this. So even if men die 10 years sooner, the 10 years before they die, they are popping pills and injections, and they are actually genuinely sick or not mobile. And so what happens is when you're main breadwinner, because they're still mainly the breadwinner in my kind of communities, you plunge your family into poverty, a cycle of poverty, which they never get out of. And so what's the answer to all these ills? Well, obviously, it's regular physical activity and culturally, where I need it, where our community, culture appropriate diet advice and guidance and support. And combining it together. So brief history, in 1998, we had the biggest sports centre on the edge of my neighbourhood, and they did not work, or none of the community went there. Forget the women, the men didn't go either. And so we did a consultation, a survey, and 256 local women said they wanted a health and fitness facility run by women for women. So I went to the head of health and I said, here's my report. I'd love to have a health and fitness centre. We've got one on the edge of our neighbourhood. Could you help me? And he said, we do health, we don't do leisure. You need to go and see the city council. So I went to the city council, head of sport, Alexander Stadium, walked in, whole stadium behind me. I said, oh, I've got a report and 256, you want women's voices? Could I work with you? And we could have like a morning and then an afternoon and then maybe a whole day for women only. And he said, women, Asian women doing sport all day, it's never going to happen. And I just remember getting up and leaving. I thought I'm never coming back, and I never did. And then in 2000, long story, but in 2002, I did a huge in 2005, I did a presentation in front of a group like this, and somebody heard me from the National Lottery and came over and said, we're going to do things differently, and we'd really like to work with you. And what I'd done in between those times was set up a girls' club, and we'd go rock climbing, skiing, canoeing, biking, and many of those girls had never ridden a bike. And I always thought the third generation would have more than I did, because girls went to school, you heard it earlier, they went home, they go to school, nothing beyond those gates. So I'd been doing that for a number of years, and they heard me at this presentation and they offered me an opportunity to get $500,000, and we secured it. Because of time I can't go into it, but our key performance indicator was to have 250 paying £10 a month, and we got that in 2 weeks. We had 265 in 2 weeks. And then the NHS came to the launch. They heard what we wanted to do, and we got our first ever commission programme to help women to manage their long-term health conditions. And then in 2010, we were asked to do it on another side of the city, which is similar to the same population that we live in. Since then, we now have 42,000 tenants. This is just one programme, by the way, 94% from ethnically diverse communities, 89% of them from the poorest areas, 52% email, that's coming down, but I'll explain later, and 5,300. 2 years of COVID during these numbers. And now we operate at 3 wellbeing centres, 9 GP surgeries and 4 parks. And now we've got to over 3,000 women who've learned how to ride a bike. So the key message kind of for me is, if you look at communities for the last 2 decades, the community that's right at the bottom is South Asian / Pakistani Bangladeshi women. So it hasn't changed in the 23 years that I've been arguing. And why does it matter? Well, if you want to tackle long-term inequalities, then I'm really sorry, but you have to do things completely different. It doesn't take a genius to tell you, but he did, which was, if you keep doing the same thing, don't expect different results. And my argument is, if you keep funding the same people, don't expect better outcomes. And so, as Dr. Anand said yesterday, 126 billion will be spent on preventable conditions. I mean, we only need 1% of that in communities like mine to change how people behave. So we always try and do things really differently. So from triathlons, I try to do it differently. Women want to do things differently. So we did kayaking, bell boating. I was challenged to help women run. I did a half marathon. The first time, 17 of us, I couldn't run either. 7 of us have gone on to do marathons. We've gone to Edinburgh, Great North Run, you name it, Dublin 10K, an excuse to go for a whole weekend away. We love it. But the triathlon is when the triathlon organisation came in, put up posters of well-to-do middle-class people running and cycling, and I just said, I can do it better than that. They had 15 signed up and I got 250, and they were running, cycling and swimming. Why? Because if I've seen it on TV, I want to do it, but it's just not delivered to me in the way I want to do it, and the way I think I can participate, which is I don't have to be an athlete, I just have to start it and complete it. So that's what being a participant is all about. And so if you want to get the opportunity right, then you have to think about who's the least likely to participate, because if you can get it right for them, everyone else is easy, aren't they? So we always do women only, but you could do age appropriate, ability, socioeconomic group, your gender, your background. But the other key thing for communities like mine is cost and opportunity. If it's local, you can build that big elephant leisure centre on the edge of my neighbourhood, but I'm not going to come through if you've never had an outreach worker, if you don't understand your community, if you don't come and see me and ask me what I want. And then it's about level and ability. We always try to do progression, so you can start at something like a social club, but at some point you will take up a physical activity. And in fact, 50% of those who come through to do a social activity always go on to a physical activity. And of course, communities, you've heard it a million times before, they don't want to be done to, they don't want to be done to, they want to be done with. And then this kind of argument, we have to do it this way because, well, you wrote the rules, you can rewrite them. You don't have to follow them because somebody in 1850 wrote that rule. This is 2024. And then what's stopping people cycling? Well, I don't live in greeny, lovely, leafy suburbia. I actually live in a really, urbanized humps and bumps and cars on either side. Why would I want to dice with death every morning? So, and the other thing is your team reflective of the community you serve? The reason why our work works is because we employ local women who we've trained, developed, grown, volunteered, and now they are paid. And then if we had it earlier, if we really want everyone to cycle, then actually give everybody a bike. It's quite simple. And then it's the culture of cycling. Mad Max on a bike, looking like Lycra, sitting on there. That's not what cycling should represent to be. We can't all be Mark Cavendish, and we don't want to be. So we got to stop thinking about having these posters of these people we can never be like. And then the infrastructure, it needs to be safe, accessible for bikes and trikes. It must flow, no awkward barriers, come out from here, go over the top, go back down, and then you've crossed a road. What is that all about? And then of course, as a group, we've always tried to do challenge. So we've got sick of having to ride around the bikes, ride around in the parks. And we started to go out to the Peak District, the Lake District, and we took 30 women, and I don't mind telling you, we went to Tissington, and I'll say it in here, but my friend, it was Pissington in Tissington. From the moment we got there till the moment we got back in the van, and we were soaked through from the moment we got there. But genuinely, it's one of my favourite rides, and that's why I remember it. And people say, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I always say, if I can't show it, I can't grow it. Because in my community, if you're not seeing people out running, cycling, whatever it is, if you can't see someone, you don't see a neighbour like you, then you're never going to do it. It's alien to my community to be running around in Lycra. Yeah. And then the Velo ride, we were asked to do 25, well, it's 45 miles at the time and 100 miles. And the first year they did it in Ramadan. And then I wrote to them, gave them the dates for next year. And the second year it was in Ramadan. I gave them a long email, said, don't do it in the third year. And the third year it was in Ramadan, that's right. So Prasanna here, who I was talking about earlier, lost her dad sadly, she said to me, Naseem, they all said Ramadan special. I said, that sounds like a dish on her. And she said, no, if we join in the last 10 miles, it's like we've done the 45. So I rang them up and I said, 3 years ago, 3 years in a row, you let me down. So they did, they let us join, and then 25 of us rode, and we all got the bikes that we were riding on. Oh, wow. And here we go. So COVID survey. I wish I'd learned to ride a bike when you asked. I could have gone out and I didn't know. Yeah. I can't do it. Oh my God, why should I? We've seen the highest numbers of people wanting to ride bikes after COVID because they realised had they learnt when they had the opportunity, they would have taken part. I could say so much more, but I don't have time. So to embed physical activity as a lifestyle, you have to understand your community and give them what they want, what they really, really want. And you know where they're at. You know, they won't come to you because they don't know what you're offering if your doors are closed. Yeah. Build the relationships with the communities you want through the door. Have that outreach worker. No point in having amazing receptionists when they don't know how to talk to people. Stop imposing your models on communities like mine. You know, no short-termisms anymore. I don't accept it. I was having that conversation yesterday. If it's not for the long term, if it's not for sustainability, I'm not interested in it. So no summer, no winter, no 6 weeks, no 12 weeks program, 3 to 5 years or not at all. And then mentor, grow, and I've said it before, train up a reflective workforce and always start at the level they're at, and stop funding national governing bodies of sport or physical activity or whatever, because actually they never reached those. If they coulda, shoulda, woulda, they could have done it by now. But if they didn't do it 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, they're not going to do it now. And if you must, because you can't change your own rules, then you must make sure 40% is what they can retain and 60% must go into direct delivery if you want to see change in the future, because then you create a win-win for all. And I suppose the last thing is we've kind of let the men join in as well. And that's because after COVID, more men died than any other area in my community. And we thought we've got to do something, and that's what we did. And I can't do any more. It's 10 minutes.
Fantastic. Okay, we have until 4. Let me just say, I know we're getting to the time when people are going to start to need to catch their trains, and if that, just come and go as you will. But the session, we have 45 minutes for discussion. Sorry, I forgot. 5 minutes, then we'll come back until 4. Okay, quick 5. Come back quickly.
Oh, and there are some annual reports here. Please take them, because I don't want to take them back. Yeah.
there was a working class led protest because it was going to go through one of the peripheral housing estates. In Scotland, cities are such that it's like France, where the poor live on the edge, right? So
Andrew, can I just stop you for 1 second, just to bring people back in the room? We're gonna restart the conversation. So this will just be gather your questions in the chat, or put your hand up if you want to join in.
Too much, actually.
And I'll hand back over to John, and I know Andrew was in the middle of talking.
Keep going, Andrew.
no, I was just talking. I was asked about any resistance to the motorway construction, and I was saying that in the 60s there wasn't much, but in the 90s they expanded the southern route. And there was it was on BBC One News. It was a very famous campaign, and there's people. There's a film called something like The Bird Watcher of Pollock or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but he was camping in the trees and trying to stop the motorway, but in the end, they lost.
Nassim.
Yeah, I was going to say in Birmingham, the reason where we had some of this ugly growth of housing and roads was because we were bombed in the war. So there was certain patches where they could then do the modernist, amazing, ugly concrete stuff that they did. So I was thinking, in relation to Glasgow, was there any of that, or is it just they wanted to modernise or get more access to being the second city?
So Clyde Bank was bombed, which is a kind of an industrial suburb to the west, but Glasgow City was relatively unscathed. So it was really a response to the sort of the Great Depression and the slums that came in the 30s and the overcrowding. And I think they were looking for a reason to just kind of wipe the slate clean. Yeah.
And
Sorry.
and then Zoe, yeah.
Quickly, the flyover in Liverpool came down quite recently because the structure was showing real signs of fatigue. Is that, I mean, I'm starting to think a lot of infrastructure we're not going to be able to afford to keep maintaining. Is that
happening?
Is that happening?
So there's the Woodside Viaduct, which is now it's closed, and they're spending £150 million on it every year to maintain it, and we're trying to utilize that. As I say, why are you propping this up literally and financially?
I think that's what it's going to come to.
It's so expensive. It's so expensive.
That money, isn't it? Keep giving the same
just
thing.
pumping it in.
Zoe.
I was just gonna mention, Bristol has the shortest motorway, the M32, and actually it also severs two communities. It was originally planned to go through a much more affluent part of the city, but Baroness so-and-so said, oh God, no, we can't have that here. It has to go in somewhere else. But actually we are seeing that those bits of the motorway starting to crumble, and it's actually going to be returned to an A road from for the last like the last mile or so. But I was going to ask, have you looked at in Seoul and other places where they have actually returned things or changed things back? I guess that would have quite positive economic as well as community benefit. That's my assumption.
There's a paper about the Chongyi Expressway and Seoul, and it shows the economic value of the land goes up. And what we're trying to argue is that they're saying, oh, you need to create an economic base for changing it. I mean, what's the economic existence? Which is that the land is probably already depressed economically because of the severance and the pollution and the land use and in Seoul they had a really charismatic visionary leader who got it done really quickly, and that's what we're lacking. So talking about this multi-scalar governance question, there's no mayor for Glasgow, there's no Metropolitan Glasgow Authority. It's a fragmented, decentralized landscape for a reason, because historically Glasgow has been deliberately undermined by Edinburgh and London politicians, because going back to the 1920s, it was Bolshevik, it was very radical, and I think it's been punished over the 20th century for being a very, very Bolshevik city, like Liverpool, actually, probably very similar to Liverpool, and Birmingham, Anyway, let's have some from others.
Yes,
please.
I'll just say this as a point rather than a question, but just one other thing is the Kingston Bridge. Why is it called Kingston, right? And so can we think about ways that like a decolonizing Glasgow can connect to the ME?
So Jude Barber, the architect that I mentioned, she actually does a project called Who Owns the Clyde? And it's all about decolonizing the ownership and the history of the River Clyde in Glasgow.
The names.
One of the famous phrases in Glasgow when you think, so this is slightly offensive, but it's like, do you think I came up the Clyde in a banana boat? It means like, do you think I'm from the colonies? It's kind of like, and it's quite an offensive term. because, you know, Virginia Street, Jamaica Street, West Nile Street, all over Glasgow, Ingram Street, these are all slave owners.
Yeah.
You know, the city made its money on cotton and tobacco, and actually the reason that we had such a comprehensive, enormous post-war plan was that Glasgow saw itself as the second city of the empire, and it was keen to maintain that status, but through modernism, through the kind of and that quickly collapsed because as soon as the war ended, the city went into economic freefall. You know, anyway.
Pearl, I had a question for you. You know, you did such a nice job of giving us kind of like the tensions between sort of congestion charging or not. I want you to say a little bit more, if you could, like, where does the balance of forces lie within your group in terms of this? Like, what's actually, is it a discussion that's inconclusive, or where is that going to go? And also New York right now, the congestion charging conversation, which I'm sure you're well aware of, is a really good one to take note of, because they're pushing they're not hesitant at all. They're pushing so hard. The governor obviously has last minute backtrack, but the pressure is on. And that seems like another model. You can maybe hear my question. I hope that you go for the congestion charging route, but what does it look like in Free London?
Well, we did try and have a conversation about this at a strategy meeting about a month ago. And it wasn't kind of on the agenda, but we had some open sessions and I kind of brought it up as, look, we've vaguely spoken about this before. We need to really have a conversation about this because we have kind of like what Silvertown did, quite a kind of open organizing model, like you just do what you want and under our banner and like we all agree on the same thing. So kind of diversity of tactics kind of works out. But we do need a line on this, I think, either to mention it or to not mention it. And the discussion was quite varied. We had some people there who hadn't come to the other meetings before, and they had been involved in some anti-LTN stuff locally. They were kind of like whatever's good for local people is what we want. Those kind of activists. And I think that was a really valuable perspective. I don't know if we needed it in the room that we were discussing it in between us. But we didn't come to a conclusion. And I don't think we were in a hurry to. So I do want to bring this conversation back to the group as well. I've actually been veering towards the other side because I think where the discourse is at the moment since COVID is very heated, and there's a lot of distrust and a lot of conspiracy theories, and everyone's fighting over this like poor people who don't own cars and whether that's a majority or a minority. And we know the facts are that richer people own more cars and then more than one car, but that facts don't really matter. It's about the narrative at this moment. So this is solely positive intervention for those people. There's no two ways about it, and it could, if we say let's not bring road charging into this, it could kind of diffuse this tension that has been in the discourse about, and just giving a present to these people. Everyone agrees this is a good thing for these people, and it's not to do with cars. And I do think there's also something to be said for, oh, how do you pay for it? How do you pay for it? How do we pay for anything? General taxation, we tax the rich. We don't need everything to have a matching tax. This is just something that's important for everyone to get around. But I'm not made my mind up yet.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Casper, you want to weigh in and then we'll go back to Zoe.
Just a couple of things. Congestion charging in London was brilliant, and now it's not brilliant anymore because the congestion charge zone is full of vehicles that don't pay congestion charge. So it worked. It was a 40% reduction in traffic. Now it's back up to the levels that it was. And listening to Pearl's campaign sounds brilliant, but if I was doing anything with that campaign, I wouldn't go anywhere near cars with it. I would just maintain it as a free public transport campaign and hope that other campaigns started up. One of the things that we're talking about, a charge in London, if you look what happened in Uxbridge for the ULEZ charge there, and how the right-wing press have now forced Sadiq Khan will not bring in road charging because of what happened in Uxbridge. So they control that narrative. When they get hold of that motor normative narrative there, then they control it. And and I think keeping those two things separate, especially in this campaign, would mean it would be more successful.
just quickly on that, that's the advice that we have gotten from our colleagues in Transport Action where possible is don't go near it. I wouldn't touch this with a barge pole. And yes, Sadiq Khan has said that he won't do any, but you know, is that set in stone? I don't know whether that's up for grabs because the mayor of New York said she would and then now she's not, so
Yeah, that was wild.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Zoe,
Yeah, I was just going to mention a couple of things. One is since Bristol has a clean air zone, I think first year generated £28 million. But whether that's sustainable over time or not, and initially when those figures came out, it wasn't very easy to get the transparency of where that money was going. And then secondly, I was going to ask how much, I guess, international comparisons you make. So I think in Luxembourg, all the buses are free. And then when Germany implemented their super cheap rail travel, I took advantage of that the other summer when I was there, but actually noting the impacts that it had because so many people use public transport that had never, that just normally didn't use it. People who were normal public transport users were like, oh, this is horrible. But actually, you know, they hadn't actually anticipated, or maybe we need to put more trains on the network. You know, just these kind of things of like thinking, I guess, through sort of what kind of blockers could come down the line, how has it worked or not worked in other places, what can you learn from that whilst you're still creating a campaign or plan.
Martin.
I wonder whether, I mean, this is not helpful discussion for a campaign, but maybe just going back to John's point about the kind of linkages and articulations, as you were sort of saying that like one of the potential solutions to the number of people on is making sure they don't need to use it. So if you have stuff locally that you don't need to get on bus so much, you can kind of thin out the demand whilst also making it accessible for those journeys that are requiring it. So whether there is some kind of connections with, you know, 15-minute city groups or sort of anything that is about kind of developing local infrastructure that just enables you to kind of build a coalition in some way.
Just a very quick point on that. I remember reading about the Luxembourg model and levels of obesity increased because people just took the bus to go to the shop instead of walking for a bit.
I live on a bus stop and I know a lot of people actually take the bus really for literally one stop. And they, you know, there are people who can walk. I understand for people who obviously have issues, but yeah, I can totally see that happen. Especially if you increase the frequency of the buses as well, which you have to because you're going to have more demand for it. Yeah.
Isn't that their personal problem? They haven't given a societal problem, so to speak, as much. Because if they're gaining weight, they can do something about themselves. They're not inflicting.
No, but then it comes back to the NHS as well with other.
But I think it's kind of,
especially if it's
you have to
kind
balance it out on the scale of how many would do that and how many would do that. I think anyway.
Naseem, can I ask you a question? You know, you and Sahaili have done, as we all, you know, there was almost like a mini applause when there's the statistic of how many people you've trained to ride. It's so impressive. But then, of course, in Birmingham, as we know, it's one of the worst places you could possibly ride a bike. So how do you deal with that tension between you've done this excellent work, you've taught all these people to ride, and now, like if you're going on a group ride, that's one thing, but people just need to get around on their own to do the things they need to do. Do they come back to you and be like, what have you done? You've taught me to ride and now it's terrible, or how does that work?
When we first started we did it ourselves because I couldn't ride, and I asked the young girls what they want to do, and I set up this kind of like, you know, what I would have liked to have done, because what I didn't say in the 10 minutes was I was born a family boy, so I obviously wanted to do sport, and I put on skiing, rock climbing, canoeing, and then when I asked girls what they want to do, they said things like jewelry making, pottery, really horrible cookery, and so I just like, I don't want to do that, but I booked it already. So then after I said I'll ask you, you know, in about 6 months' time when the money runs out and I've got to book the next lot, what you want to do. And then after doing all those things, as I said before, they wanted to do they wanted to do quad biking, they wanted to do speed boating, they wanted to go to Wales, because that is the limit of what somebody's vision is when you live like that. And so one of the things that I taught them during that, what I'd already booked was cycling, and to my horror, not one girl could ride a bike. Now, for me, in my generation, I understood it was more kind of like culturally appropriate to not be seen and not heard, but I just didn't think it'd be the same for the third and fourth generation. So then we started, but the first contract, so to speak, or money we got, they said, teach women to ride around the park, and we're like, but they can't even ride. but they refused to give us money for learn to ride, and this is what I mean about imposing models. They wanted to give us money only for riding, so then I raised some other money for cycling, learn to ride, and I met someone who's now my team leader. She was the first Asian woman who went into the cycling. She was told to do it all in schools just for young kids, and she was like, what's the point of me teaching young kids if their moms don't know how to support them or whatever? But the school, again, the money is for the kids. And so then I found some other money. Myself and Shafia then started to put on sessions on Saturday in one of the most difficult parks in the city. And when we went there, the first thing we were told was take a stab vest, this, that, and the other. And actually, we've been there since 2002. So we've been there nearly 16 years, and we've never had any instance whatsoever, because the perception of what the park is like and what it is actually like is completely different.
I had issues though. We had a training session with mothers and teenage daughters, and at one point a guy with a machete ran through our training session that close to one of the girls, chasing another guy on a moped. So
but then that's one day.
Yeah, it's one day, and things do happen. And but we were told, the police came out and they talked to us and they said, look, they don't harm you guys. They're there to they have gang issues. There's obviously a lot of gang violence, and we have young people who don't, especially boys, who wouldn't come from across the road to the park because it's another gang territory and stuff. But that doesn't impact on us, and they don't harm us. They're interested in each other and stabbing each other. But
sadly,
But
so,
we've things do happen though. But the women came back, and the police came and they talked to them, and that was really reassuring. But you've got to deal with things happening when you do stuff like that.
Definitely. And so then what we started to do is put on a regular ride on a Saturday morning before the ride around the park, and then that's how it really worked. And what we found is actually many of the women do not want to ride because they don't want to be seen out there in public, but over time they'll see other women like them, and that's when they'll join. So what we'll do is we'll deliberately, once they know how to ride a bike, which is 9 till 10, and then 10 till 11 we'll take them around the park, so women will be walking and seeing them, and then we'll have all our lanyards and stuff, our high vis on with our number and stuff, and people stop and say, can we join? And we'll say, yes you can, and it's for free, and we give you the bike, and yes, you only have to bring your enthusiasm, no helmets, no bike, just your enthusiasm, and turn up. And then once they've got to that, we then give them the 12 till 11 till 1, 11 till 12, which is on your own. We start to give you the bikes on your own, but you've got to go through those 3 hours. And then once you've done that, you join the Sunday cycling club, where we do 5, 10, 15, 25-mile rides. So you go out on different long lead rides depending on your ability. But the other thing we've also started to do is sessions from one park to another park, which we never could do before, but we're now doing that. And I think, going back to the money thing, this is all without a full-time officer's cost, to be honest with you. So just imagine what we could do if we actually had a full-time team, or if we had a north, south, east, and west, what you could do if you had people who were paid enough to coordinate.
Because funding is always just paying for the time you pay maybe instructors, maybe a bit project management, but it never pays for core costs, and that's obviously a major issue for funding. So core funding is always something we're looking for.
And one kind of final thing I'll say is I do have a real big if you gave me a soapbox, I could do 3 hours on it, which is, why do poor people have to volunteer? Because if you're well-to-do middle class and your husband or wife is on 100,000 a year, if you want to volunteer a couple of hours, come along, I don't mind. Do it every week for the next 10 years. I'm happy with it. But someone in the poorest communities, we've trained them, we've got them to that stage, and then we've got to say, carry on volunteering for life. Why? Nobody else would do it. So
I'm much more in favor of now getting funding for the lead rides as well, because first of all, it's more sustainable than with volunteers, but also it gets someone, and often those are women who really just want to earn a little bit on the side, to top up the grocery budget or something, and it's a great match.
You could talk about it for 3 hours. I'm tempted to extend the session till 7. Did I see your hand? I see these two. So you go for Barton, then Pearl. That's fine.
Sure. I can come in later if you've got something you want.
I just wanted to come back on Zoe's point about the transparency of the money, because it's not actually road user charging isn't actually a very unpopular policy. It's like nationally 38% support and 41% oppose. And that goes up to 62% support if you put the condition on it that all the money will go back into funding public transport, which I think is quite good. That's a majority, right? And that's exactly what they did in Cambridge in 2021-22. They had a whole program of let's improve the buses, let's have London level service. It was like higher frequencies, like 6 to 8 per hour. They were putting loads more routes on. It was a rural priority. And it was going to be a flat charge of £1, £2, I think, to ride the bus. And then more expensive to drive into Cambridge. It was going to be funded by this thing as a £5 zone. And it was really popular. The bus plans got like 70% support. And even amongst people who were opposed to the raise user charging zone, the bus support was very high, and it was higher in all the other groups. But the opposition to the road charging zone was 58%, so which for the politicians there locally was so significant that they abandoned the plans. The new Labour administration, I'm sure you know, came in and abandoned them. So I don't think it even has to be like the most unpopular policy ever. And they were even doing exactly what we wanted to test out, right? It was improved frequency, reliability, cheaper fares. And it's a real shame that we didn't get to see what happened with mode shift in that scenario. Also on the overcrowding thing, that's actually something that the unions have said to us. They've said, yes, it would increase people coming onto the public transport, and that's great. But at the moment, sometimes the tickets are limiting that, and we just can't have that many people coming on, which I think is really valid and elucidating of the state of the public transport system at the moment, quite how underfunded they are, that they don't even have they need this cap on people coming on. So I guess it's just even more important that we have the investment.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what I was going to speak to. I'm sorry if this has already been said whilst we've sorted some other things out, but I think what I really like about the campaign that you laid out there, Pearl, was it's kind of about political economy. It's about sort of saying that what we need to do is think about, like, when you're sort of positioning it, you know, thinking about public transport in a different way as a public good, as a sort of, and public goods need investment, and it needs to come from kind of sort of state institutions and sort of taxpayers. And I suppose, well, I was kind of linking that with that conversation that Marion and Nassim were just having, is that, like, we seem to be suffering. This is a kind of product in some way of sort of neoliberal political economy, is that you're constantly dealing with short-term grants, or and having to spend so much of your time writing grants to get pots of money to try and do something like this. And that actually, in some ways, those conversations need to be connecting up, because it's the same thing that universities are dealing with as well. And the sort of the shift into kind of grant capture culture just means that you spend so long trying to get 5 years worth of money, however long that then takes to kind of get set up. We then struggle to do proper long-term engagement with practitioners like yourselves, and then how do you kind of carry on the end of that? At the end of the grant, it becomes really difficult. So I think just thinking about maybe the conversations that we might want to continue with as part of the group, I think not getting sucked into thinking about active travel as just being this thing about what infrastructure do we, or even just what kind of bike lanes and stuff need to be connected up with that broader conversation of, well, actually need to think about what are we prioritize in terms of how we think about the economics of it, the sort of politics of it, and positioning them together so that we're not wasting such great work that's kind of going on then just getting.
It's really, people often say, build it and they shall come. That's true for a certain part of the population, they will come, but not everyone, and a large part of the population, especially in areas where we have very diverse communities, they won't come. And there are so many negative perceptions which people have about cycling, that they do need help to take it up. And funding is always. I once spoke to someone who said to me, 80% of my job is finding grants to keep myself in the job I'm working in, and that time is wasted on really doing valuable work in other parts. It wasn't a cycling person, but similar community group style. And that's really a struggle I think we all have. And I can see that in universities as well, that it's the same thing, isn't it?
But also at local government level, like the city deal model is crap, because it's like, city councils will spend thousands of pounds on building bids, only for the Westminster, but no, sorry, we chose Leeds over Bradford or whatever, and it's just such a waste, and it's such a conservative neoliberal mindset of like, oh, you need to compete strongly, survival of the
Even local
fittest.
authorities have to compete for funding
Yeah.
to build
It's
infrastructure, which
ridiculous,
they
yeah.
shouldn't have to, and
Exactly.
or you're the better local authority,
Exactly.
you, or maybe they have someone who is just a bit better in wording grant applications, and it just shouldn't be the case.
But we still have organisations and groups that can apply for money. They can parachute in, they can all get all the statistics, they're the best bid writers, but they know nothing about the community, they don't live in the community, they don't work in the community, they've never lived close enough to the community. There's so many organisations I can name. And then I usually get an email that says, hi, we've got this project, we've employed our own officer, full-time salaried person. And now what we need to do is engage with the community. We'd love to work with you. Why didn't you work with me before you applied for the money? Why didn't you apply for me during the time you applied? Why didn't you work with me when you got the money? Because you could have paid for one of my officers to do that job, because now what you want my officer to do is what your officer should be doing, and you just genuinely want me to get you the brown numbers, and that's what it is.
And
So I just don't do
to
it.
pay you for it.
No, you've got to do it free. You should be grateful it's come through your door. So I just say no.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And
Then
you've gotta learn
that's
to
so true. I
do it.
have the same experience. Yeah, that's really.
Short
And
email.
those, and they get the biggest funding, and then they put projects on, and the participation is like really low, and there's no long-term engagement. So there is no end result. Where I think we doing long-term engagements, and there's a very clear visible result at the end. But yeah, we are too small often.
And that's why when the funding comes, there should be some kind of stipulation. Two things I always say. Number one, about the ratio of the money that is actually then spent within that community. And then the second thing is about where you built those partnerships before you put that bid in. So there should be a box in there. Do you have a partner?
Yeah.
Do you have partners? What percentage of the funding are they going to get? Because what I've also known, I can name 2 organisations who, because they work with us, they've had, I'd probably tot it up to about 7-8 million for the work that they do, because we reach the ethnic minorities, women, the poorest areas, and we will have got in total in the last 4 years about 750,000 of them.
Right.
Which in comparison is peanuts.
Yeah.
And I have to pay my officers on hourly rates and whatever, and I've just stopped doing it over the last 2 years because I actually think I'm kind of almost like supporting them to carry on with that system of how they, so I just now, whenever I'm asked to do something, I just say a direct no. And then they'll come back and say, oh, but no. Either you ask me what I want to do and how much does it cost, or you said you could do it, go and do it.
Yeah.
So it's a hard one, but you've got to do it. You've got to
Otherwise,
build
you're just replicating the power structures.
it's a constant wheel that you, bit like a mouse, you're constantly on that wheel, and I've got enough. I don't go on it anymore.
Pearl.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Andrew if you have you come down on one side or the other of going with what the local authority, you need to make a justifiable modelling case or an economic case for removing the M8 and kind of like being within that government mindset of justify this, because I feel like what people say to us a lot is, with this free public transport, how are you going to pay for it? And we feel like we need to justify it with some kind of tax, or like road user charging, when I do think maybe the actual solution is let another campaign take the flak for that, and there's nothing to do with us. So I just wonder if, John, so you have reasons that we should in fact focus more on mode shift and trying to get this 50% reduction, 27% reduction in driving directly using this.
I'm also compelled by what Casper said. I mean, I won't say too much more, but I just was thinking with the New York law, and even the language we use. I like congestion charging because it speaks to like, who wants congestion? People should pay if they're causing that. Whereas road user charging seems that fits into the discourse of like only people who own cars pay taxes or what have you. But I have more to say about it, but I will actually let Ed speak next because we are very close to time here.
Yeah, so yeah, Casper, question for you. I'm conscious we've been through a few shocks in the last few years, COVID and the Ukraine stuff, which has impacted mobility, energy, food, the whole thing. So do you foresee, or have you thought of any other future shocks that might be incoming, and how that might impact mobility and how we could potentially use them to our advantage, you know, in the same way that the Dutch classically did in the 70s.
I'm worried, I mean.
Sorry, that's a really.
It's a repetition of those shocks, you know, wars getting place, and that's a shock, other extreme weather events and pandemics, you know, and food shocks as well. But there's obviously, we're all seeing the lack of the way that food is being grown and how that's failing us. But how they all play out, I mean, we're really, really isolated from that here, particularly, you know, even in the UK, we're not getting the same even extreme weather shocks that we're seeing playing out around in Germany and Italy and Sicily and then the wildfires in Greece. You know, we're not having that. That's
Not yet.
having the same sort of impact yet. It won't be long at all. It won't be long. But you know, if it's war that hits us first before all of that, which will probably be because of a lack of food, our transport issues are going to be very, very different, aren't they?
Someone ask a nicer question. Sorry, that was too gloomy. That
It's 5:02. I'm very aware that people need to leave like pretty much immediately at 4. So does anyone have any kind of thoughts from this session? Obviously, it's very good. There's so much more we could say, but even anything more generally, I mean, I'm just feeling like very grateful at the moment for all of these conversations, which is its own positive feeling. Marianne.
No, I think this was really a great event. I really enjoyed listening to all of you. I think that some great points came across, and I think really, taking this forward and not having it just as a one-off, and kind of, I hope we stay in touch and kind of can collaborate on some things with each other where appropriate. And I think, I really enjoyed it, and it was really a lot of learning as well involved in this one. So thank you all very much.
I just want to echo that as well. It's been fabulous. Really, really good experience. And thank you both for organising and also as well. It's been really fabulous.
Could we get a photo before everyone disappears?
That's a nice idea.
Yes.
Just thinking, where would
Do
be?
you want to ask Lucy if she's still around, or no, she's gone? Or
No, she'll be here. Yeah, I can. I think we should probably say then goodbye to the people online, and thank you for joining us. And I'll be reaching out to everybody with an email and say thank you and think about next steps. Thank you, Spain. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for organizing this event. Thank you.
Thank you for going. Yeah.
See you soon.
See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah.